Hello everyone, I understand you're here to listen as you fall asleep, so before we begin, I'd like to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. This will help set the tone for our story. Remember, this narrative is meant to be engaging and easy to follow, so let's get straight into it. Our first story centers on James Joseph Buer Jr., better known as Whitey. He was born on September 3rd, 1929 in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Rising to notoriety, he became the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, an Irish-American organized crime group operating in Boston during the 70s and 80s. Buer's gang engaged in a variety of illegal activities, including drug distribution, extortion, and numerous violent crimes. He wielded considerable influence within Boston's underworld, largely because he managed to evade law enforcement for years, partly by acting as an FBI informant. This role granted him protection and insider knowledge, allowing him to stay a step ahead of authorities. By 1994, with the threat of indictment looming, Buer fled Boston and spent 16 years as a fugitive. During this period, he was featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, with reported sightings in several different countries, fueling public intrigue. Despite intensive searches, he remained elusive, sparking widespread speculation about his whereabouts. His flight ended on June 22, 2011, when he was captured in Santa Monica, California. Under the alias Charles Gaskin, he had been living in a rent-controlled apartment with his longtime companion, Catherine Gregg. Their arrest stemmed from a renewed media campaign by the FBI, which focused on Gregg, ultimately revealing their location. Authorities discovered firearms, cash, and numerous false IDs inside their apartment. Over $800,000 was hidden within the walls, an indicator of Buer's paranoia and his efforts to prepare for a life on the run. His arrest shocked Boston, reviving memories of the fear he once inspired. For many, it marked justice catching up with a man responsible for countless crimes. Still, opinions about him remained divided, particularly among those in neighborhoods once under his control. The subsequent trial became one of the most notable criminal cases in recent American history. Prosecutors presented evidence of his involvement in 19 murders, extortion schemes, and drug trafficking, while former associates testified to his brutality. His defense attempted to portray him as a criminal, but not as an informant, claiming he had never cooperated with the FBI, despite clear evidence to the contrary. The courtroom was packed with victims' families, journalists, and curious onlookers eager to see the man who had eluded justice for so long. Even in his old age, Buer carried an air of defiance, often dismissing witnesses and refusing to testify for himself. The trial lasted for weeks, gradually unveiling details of his crimes and the corruption that had allowed him to operate nearly undetected for decades. When the verdict was finally announced, it concluded a chapter of relentless pursuit and justice. James Bulger, found guilty on multiple charges, including racketeering, extortion, and racketing, received a sentence of 2 consecutive life terms, along with an additional 5 years behind bars. During the sentencing, the judge condemned him as a cunning and depraved criminal who had caused profound suffering to many victims and their loved ones. Even while incarcerated, Bulger's influence lingered, his notorious legacy overshadowing his final years. His life was marked by dominance, violence, and betrayal, markedly striking both enemies and allies who once trusted him. In 2018, at the age of 89, Bulger's story came to an end when fellow inmates caused his death, a fate many saw as fitting for someone whose life was built on brutality. His passing closed a chapter in Boston's long saga of organized crime, though his name remains infamous, emblematic of how corruption and violence can intertwine within society's darkest corners. Bulger's arrest in 2011 signified the conclusion of an era, yet it merely launched a complex legal process that drew national attention. The authorities had spent decades pursuing him, and once in custody, the full scope of his crime started to emerge. As prosecutors prepared their case, shocking details of his violent reign over Boston's underworld surfaced, even to those familiar with his criminal pursuits. Under Bulger's leadership, the Winter Hill Gang operated with ruthless efficiency, controlling much of the city's illegal gambling, loan sharking, and drug distribution networks. Anyone who dared challenge him often vanished without a trace. His method of consolidating power combined intimidation and manipulation, aided by informants planted throughout the community, which kept him far ahead of law enforcement. His reputation for brutality ensured most dared not oppose him directly. One of the most notorious facets of Bulger's illicit career was his complicity with corrupt elements within the FBI. While the Bureau's mission was to dismantle organized crime, certain agents had become entangled in Bulger's web of corruption. For years, he provided information on rival criminals in exchange for protection from prosecution, an arrangement allowing him free rein, eliminating competitors while sidestepping significant legal repercussions. During court proceedings, prosecutors described how Bulger exploited his status as an informant to orchestrate murders, extortion, and other schemes of intimidation. Witnesses, including former gang members, victims' families, and law enforcement officials, testified about their long-standing fear of Bulger. Many had endured silent suffering for decades, now finally able to confront him through the courtroom. Among the emotional testimonies was that of relatives of Deborah Davis, a young woman dating one of Bulger's associates. She had allegedly uncovered too much about the gang's activities, prompting Bulger to order her death. Her brother's testimony was filled with grief and fury as he recounted years of unanswered questions and loss. Similar stories from other families painted a chilling portrait of a man whose criminal empire thrived on intimidation and silence. For many years, Bulger remained outside the bounds of the law, despite overwhelming evidence pointing to his guilt. Throughout his trial, he maintained a resolute stance, refusing to testify in his own defense and dismissing the proceedings as a sham. His legal team aimed to undermine the credibility of key witnesses, many of whom were former criminals who had provided crucial testimony in exchange for lighter sentences. Nevertheless, the sheer volume of their accounts, coupled with physical evidence tying Bulger to numerous crimes, left little doubt about his involvement. As the trial advanced, attention shifted towards the deep corruption within the FBI that had enabled Bulger's reign. Testimony uncovered that some agents had actively protected him, providing him with information about investigations and helping him avoid arrest. This revelation sparked outrage among the public and raised serious concerns about the integrity of law enforcement agencies. During the peak of Bulger's influence, his defense claimed he had never been an informant and that his dealings with the FBI had been exaggerated. However, FBI documents and former agents' testimonies painted a contrasting picture. Bulger had exploited the system to serve his criminal empire, using law enforcement contacts as tools to his advantage. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Witnesses recounted violent acts with chilling detail. One former associate described how Bulger had personally strangled a man, while another testified about being ordered to dig graves for his victims, each account adding to the already staggering case. Public interest in the trial was intense, with courtroom sketches of the aging gangster gracing newspapers and daily news coverage streaming on television. Many residents of Boston, especially those who had witnessed Bulger's reign, observed with a mix of fascination and relief. For some, his eventual capture and the prosecution's efforts marked a long overdue reckoning. For others, particularly those who had long lived in fear of him, it was hard to believe he was finally powerless. As the trial drew to a close, the prosecution delivered a compelling closing argument, portraying Bulger as more than a mere criminal. He was a ruthless predator who had terrorized the city for decades by leveraging his cleverness and connections. The prosecutors urged the jury to hold him accountable for the pain and suffering he had caused, emphasizing the extent of his brutality. In contrast, the defense's attempts to discredit witnesses and minimize Bulger's ties to law enforcement proved insufficient. Their arguments could not outweigh the mounting evidence of witness testimonies, criminal acts, and the sheer scope of his misconduct were too significant to ignore. The nation waited with bated breath as the jury deliberated. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom was enveloped in a tense silence. The judge prepared to read the decision, and the outcome would determine Bulger's fate, something entirely out of his control after a lifetime of dominance. After over 30 hours of deliberation, the jury carefully examined weeks of testimonies and hundreds of pieces of evidence. The gravity of their decision was profound. James Whitey Bulger had cast a long shadow over Boston for decades, a man whose name was whispered in cautious fear. Now the moment of truth had arrived. As Bulger sat motionless, with an unreadable expression, the court's foreman began to read the verdict. One by one, each charge was announced. Guilty, guilty, guilty. These verdicts confirmed what many had long suspected, but lacked proof of in a court of law. Whitey Bulger was a criminal mastermind, a murderer who built his empire on intimidation, treachery, and violence. As the final count was announced, a wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Victims' family members, many of whom had waited decades for justice, started to cry, some clutching each other in support. Their tears were a testament to both their relief and deep pain. Some individuals remained frozen, still trying to grasp that Bulger was finally being held responsible. The defendant, at 83 years old, appeared frail, yet showed no signs of remorse. Throughout the trial, he had refused to accept his guilt, dismissing witnesses, insulting prosecutors, and mocking former allies who testified against him. Now, confronted with the court's judgment, he sat silently, an echo of a violent past that had finally caught up with him. The judge quickly imposed the maximum sentence, 2 life terms plus 5 additional years with no chance of parole or ever regaining freedom. This severe punishment was more than just a consequence for Bulger. It was a statement about justice correcting years of failure that had allowed him to operate unchecked. The judge spoke sharply, expressing disgust for Bulger's actions. He described him as a cunning and depraved criminal, responsible for inflicting immense suffering on his victims and their loved ones. The court condemned not only Bulger's brutality, but also his manipulation of law enforcement, highlighting his betrayal of the FBI and his lack of remorse or conscience. For some victims' families, the verdict brought a sense of closure. Patricia Donahue, whose husband Michael had been murdered by Bulger's associates in 1982, told reporters outside the court that after 30 years of living in fear, justice was finally served. "He's going away forever," she said. However, not everyone was fully satisfied. Many believed that the FBI itself bore some responsibility for enabling Bulger's crimes. His secret ties with corrupt agents had allowed him to evade arrest for years, often being tipped off about investigations and ensuring that his rivals, rather than he, were targeted. While some law enforcement officials faced prosecution, the full extent of systemic corruption remained a sore point, a reminder of the failure to prevent Bulger's reign of terror. Bulger was transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Coleman, Florida. Even behind bars, his reputation remained formidable. Some inmates viewed him as a figure of influence, a reminder that his notoriety endured beyond the courtroom. Once regarded as a legendary figure in the world of organized crime, he was seen by many as a gangster who had defied the system for decades. Others, however, viewed him as a treacherous individual who had betrayed his own associates while maintaining an illusion of invincibility. His time behind bars was not easy. Once the most intimidating man in Boston, Bulger had become merely an aging criminal stripped of his former influence and power. During his imprisonment, he spent most of his time in solitary confinement, fully aware that his reputation made him a target. At the age of nearly 90, he was transferred to the high-security facility at Hazleton in West Virginia, a move that would ultimately prove to be fatal. Less than a day after arriving, on the morning of October 30th, 2018, Bulger was discovered dead in his cell. His face had been violently beaten beyond recognition, and his body lay in a pool of blood. Officials described the assault as swift and ruthless, reminiscent of the brutal tactics Bulger himself had once used against others. The prime suspects appeared to be fellow inmates with links to organized crime. Among them was Foso Freddy Haas, a known mafia enforcer with a deep-seated hostility towards informants and a former hitman from Bulger's own criminal network. Though the precise circumstances of his death remain uncertain, one fact was clear. Bulger had met the end he often inflicted upon others during his life. His death provoked intense public reactions. Some considered it poetic justice, a failure of the justice system to protect him in his vulnerable state. Others questioned how such a high-profile elderly prisoner could have been placed in an environment where violence was so readily possible. Bulger's legacy remains controversial, a man whose crimes and vast connections left a lasting scar on the American legal landscape. For law enforcement, his story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by corruption and unchecked power. For the families of his victims, his name continues to evoke pain and loss. To the city of Boston, he embodies both a haunting relic of its darkest days and a symbol of the relentless pursuit of justice, which, despite delays, ultimately caught up with him. Pedro Rodriguez's violent behavior persisted behind bars, where he continued to commit assaults and targeted fellow inmates he deemed beyond redemption. Reports indicate he was responsible for at least 40 such incidents during his imprisonment. Despite the staggering tally, Brazil's legal system limited all prisoners to a maximum sentence of 30 years, which meant Rodriguez was to be released in 2007 after completing his term. His release sparked widespread controversy, with many fearing he would revert to his past violent ways. Initially, he appeared to seek a quiet life, staying out of trouble and even giving interviews in which he claimed to have changed. However, in 2011, he was reapprehended on charges including inciting disturbances and deprivation of liberty. The circumstances of his rearrest suggested that he had not abandoned his aggressive tendencies, fueling public concern over the effectiveness of Brazil's correctional policies in managing dangerous offenders. The case of Rodriguez highlighted significant shortcomings within the justice system, exposing how sentencing laws at the time failed to prevent his ongoing violence and made it possible for him to continue harming others even within the prison walls. His story became a stark reminder of the risks posed when society's sentencing policies do not align with the realities of dangerous individuals. The response from the public was intense, with many questioning how someone responsible for numerous serious incidents was ever allowed to walk free. Some argued that reforms to the legal limits on sentences were overdue, while others debated whether certain offenders should face lifelong restrictions from society. This case underscored deeper systemic flaws. Prisons were not sufficiently equipped to rehabilitate violent offenders, and in many cases they inadvertently facilitated their continued offending. Throughout the years, Rodriguez showed little remorse for his actions. In various interviews, he spoke about his past with chilling detachment, often describing details of his offenses with a disturbing nonchalance, sometimes even laughing or selecting to express no regret. His demeanor reinforced the perception of him as a man who viewed violence as innate, living by his own brutal code for so long that moral boundaries no longer held significance. As his case unfolded, Brazil watched with a mix of fascination and horror. Rodriguez had spent years as both a feared perpetrator and a symbol of the justice system's failures. His 2011 arrest raised more questions than answers. Was it possible for someone like him to truly change, or was he simply a reminder that some individuals are beyond redemption? The public reaction to his rearrest was a blend of relief and outrage, as many believed his supposed transformation had been superficial, a fleeting attempt to mask his underlying nature. His initial release in 2007 had already sparked controversy, with legal experts and the families of his victims questioning how someone with such a record could be allowed to reintegrate into society. His involvement in numerous acts of violence, both within detention facilities and beyond, raised questions about whether such individuals could be reintegrated into society. The solution appeared to lie with the legal system itself. At the time, Brazil's criminal code limited prison terms to a maximum of 30 years, regardless of the gravity or multiplicity of offenses committed. This meant that no matter how many lives Rodriguez had taken, the law mandated he serve only 3 decades behind bars. Over the years, reforms gradually increased this ceiling to 40 years, but by then, Rodriguez had already completed his sentence under the old regulations and was released. Despite his violent past, he chose to remain in the countryside, where he claimed to pursue a peaceful existence dedicated to religion and introspection. Throughout various interviews, Rodriguez spoke about his history with a detached tone. He acknowledged his crimes openly but insisted he had changed, projecting himself as a reformed individual who had abandoned a life of violence in search of redemption. Nevertheless, skepticism persisted. Critics wondered whether a man responsible for so many lives, who had spent years acting on impulse rather than calculation, could truly be rehabilitated. Unlike typical serial offenders who often exhibit cold, manipulative traits, Rodriguez's crimes appeared spontaneous, driven by his personal perceptions of justice rather than strategic planning. He regarded murder as a means to right perceived wrongs rather than as an act of malicious intent. His 2011 arrest shattered any illusions of genuine reform. Details about the incident remained sparse at first, but reports indicated he had been involved in a dispute that led to accusations of inciting unrest and depriving someone of their liberty. Though these charges were less severe than his previous crimes, they demonstrated that he was still inclined toward violence and unable or unwilling to abandon his old ways. Public response was immediate and intense, reigniting debates about Brazil's justice system and its capacity to handle individuals of his nature. Some viewed his rearrest as predictable, a sign that the law had been overly optimistic in believing he could be safely released. Others argued that Rodriguez was an extreme case, unrepresentative of the broader system, and that his situation should not influence policy. Law enforcement officials, especially those who had encountered him firsthand, expressed concern about his ongoing danger. They described him as one of the most perilous individuals they had ever faced, operating according to his own rules and seemingly unaffected by the gravity of his actions. Many officers openly admitted they had never truly believed in his capacity for reform, viewing his release as a legal technicality rather than a reflection of genuine change. As Rodriguez awaited his trial, questions about his future and the effectiveness of the justice system continued to provoke debate regarding the possibilities of redemption for those with such deeply troubled histories. Following his recent arrest, both journalists and true crime enthusiasts revisited the disturbing chapters of Pedro Rodriguez's past, meticulously delving into his previous crimes. They recounted how he had once hunted down and executed a man responsible for killing his pregnant partner. His incarcerations revealed a grim pattern as he persisted in his violent pursuits within prison, targeting individuals he considered beyond redemption. One of the most unsettling aspects of his history was his apparent lack of remorse. In interviews, he spoke about his acts with unsettling casualness, often laughing as he recalled how he had carried out his killings. When asked about his continued violence behind bars, his reply was blunt. Those he targeted were inherently bad and deserved their fate. This belief fueled his image as a terrifying figure, convinced that he was an agent of justice, viewing his actions not as crimes but as justified interventions. His case cast a harsh light on Brazil's justice system, exposing its inability to manage individuals like him effectively. Decades spent behind bars did not tame him. Instead, prison often became a new arena for his violence, allowing him to pursue a personal crusade. His eventual release was not rooted in reform or readiness for reintegration, but was simply a consequence of legal limits on sentencing. As his upcoming trial approached, the public and authorities faced a pressing question. Could this time be different? Would the justice system take stronger measures to prevent him from reoffending, or would he slip through the cracks again, as he had before? These uncertainties created a tense atmosphere, emphasizing the broader concern about the system's shortcomings in handling repeat violent offenders. Rodriguez's story had transitioned into a haunting legend, a truly unsettling narrative that both fascinated and horrified many. Unlike most killers, his motives appeared more calculated. He deliberately selected victims he deemed corrupt or threatening, framing himself as a misguided vigilante rather than an ordinary murderer. Some viewed him as a perverse anti-hero, embodying a flawed form of justice that the official system refused or failed to deliver. Yet, regardless of his self-justifications, the undeniable truth remained. Pedro Rodriguez had taken numerous lives, both inside and outside prison walls, without showing remorse or hesitation. His actions perpetuated a chilling reminder of how deeply flawed the justice apparatus had become when faced with a man who viewed himself as a relentless force of retribution. His manner during the crimes was unsettling in its nonchalance, as if discussing everyday matters rather than the violent loss of life. This lack of sensitivity was what truly alarmed the public. It wasn't just the acts themselves, but his evident belief that he held the authority to determine who should live or die. Although his arrest in 2011 might not have been for a murder, it raised grave doubts about whether he could ever fully escape the violence that had defined him. Reports indicated he was involved in a clash with local gang members, leading to accusations of inciting a disturbance and unlawfully detaining someone. The details remained unclear, but what was undeniable was his recurring involvement in criminal circles, unable or unwilling to abandon a lifestyle that had shaped his existence for years. Many believed his return to violence was inevitable. Having spent most of his life behind bars, a brutal environment where survival often meant ruthless conduct, he seemed to have been transformed into someone incapable of reintegration. Even in a society that advocates for second chances, questions arose about the realism of such hope for a person with his past. His case sparked renewed debate over Brazil's sentencing policies. Many found it astonishing that he had been released, given that he had been responsible for over 70 deaths, including fellow inmates. How could a justice system claim fairness when someone like Rodriguez was set free simply because of a legal deadline? Should individuals with a demonstrated pattern of extreme hostility be given the chance for parole? Some legal experts called for tighter sentencing rules, especially for repeat offenders with violent histories, arguing that cases like Rodriguez's proved certain criminals were beyond reform and that laws must acknowledge this grim reality. Others cautioned against reactionary reforms, pointing out that shifting policies based on a single notorious case might lead to excessively harsh punishments for minor infractions. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's notoriety continued to grow. His story had featured in books, documentaries, and extensive media coverage long before his 2011 arrest, but that event renewed public focus on his life. Once he claimed to have changed and expressed remorse for his past deeds, now that claim seemed farcical. If he truly had reformed, then why was he again embroiled in criminal activities? His public image was deeply disconcerting. Unlike many offenders who avoided the spotlight, he seemed eager to embrace attention. Numerous interviews revealed him speaking openly about his crimes, often with a chilling indifference to remorse. Sometimes he even smiled while recounting his acts, as if recalling past triumphs rather than confessing to severe wrongdoings. As his trial loomed, perceptions deepened that he was not merely dangerous but entirely devoid of typical human empathy. Legal experts debated his future, with prosecutors pushing for the harshest possible sentence, claiming that Rodriguez was too perilous to reintegrate into society. Yet, many worried that the justice system's inherent limitations might once again prevent him from being detained indefinitely. Some believed Rodriguez relished the attention he garnered by cultivating an image of a larger-than-life figure, a myth he had crafted around himself as a vigilante who targeted only wrongdoers, positioning himself as a crusader delivering justice in a fallen world. Beneath that carefully constructed persona lay a stark reality, a man responsible for taking countless lives, continuing his violence even while incarcerated, and despite protesting reform, once again entangled in legal proceedings. His rearrest did not clarify whether genuine change was possible. Instead, it reinforced the notion that certain individuals might be inherently predisposed to violence, with punitive measures unable to erase their darker nature. Brazil's justice system had offered Rodriguez a chance at redemption, but his subsequent actions indicated he had never truly left his past behind. As he awaited his fate behind prison walls, the nation watched anxiously, contemplating whether this time justice would finally prevail. In a different part of the world, Norway faced a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on its collective psyche. On July 22, 2011, a 32-year-old man with extreme views carried out a terror attack that resulted in the deaths of 77 innocent people. This horrific event became the deadliest on Norwegian soil since the Second World War. The assault began in the heart of Oslo at approximately 3:25 in the afternoon, forever altering the nation's sense of security and unity. On a day when chaos erupted in Norway, a devastating explosion shattered the cityscape of the government district. A van filled with an improvised explosive weighing approximately 950 kilograms had been carefully placed near the office of then Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg. The force of the blast caused 8 fatalities and injured over 200 individuals, of whom 12 suffered critical wounds. The explosion inflicted severe structural damage to nearby government buildings, shattered countless windows, and hurled debris across the area. Panic spread rapidly as emergency teams responded with urgency, working tirelessly to rescue those trapped beneath the rubble and tend to the wounded. Initially, speculation ran rampant, with many pointing to an organized international group as the culprit, given the attack's scale and precision. In response, Norway's authorities activated emergency protocols, advising civilians to stay indoors while law enforcement sealed off key locations across the city. Rescue and assessment efforts intensified as intelligence agencies began scrutinizing the possibility of further threats. Amid the widespread uncertainty, few realized that this destructive act was merely a prelude to something even more sinister. While crisis teams managed the aftermath of the bombing, in the background, a man named Breivik was already enacting the next phase of his plan. Disguised as a police officer, he drove to Utoya Island, located about 40 kilometers northwest of the city. The island was hosting a summer camp for youth workers affiliated with the Labour Party, and hundreds of teenagers had gathered there for political discussion, leisure, and leadership training, unaware of the impending horror. Shortly after arriving at the ferry dock, Breivik smoothly convinced security personnel to ferry him to Utoya under the pretense of conducting a routine check. Once on the island, he gained the trust of the camp organizers, which made his subsequent actions even more devastating. Without hesitation, he drew a semi-automatic rifle and a pistol, then opened fire on the unsuspecting group. Victims collapsed within moments, and a chorus of screams and chaos erupted as the terrified attendees scrambled for shelter. Many tried to hide in tents, while others sprinted towards the water, hoping to escape via swimming. With a chilling demeanor, Breivik moved through the camp, his face cold and emotionless. Survivors later recounted how he deliberately taunted them in a falsely reassuring tone before executing those who emerged from hiding. His unwavering resolve left no room for mercy, only a relentless pursuit of destruction. The carnage persisted for over an hour, during which emergency lines were flooded with calls for help. However, remote locations, communication failures, and logistical hurdles delayed the emergency response, allowing the tragedy to deepen. The chaos caused by the bombing in Oslo, combined with the confusion from the ongoing crisis in the city, hampered immediate intervention on the island where a deadly attacker was roaming freely. With terrifying precision, he targeted anyone he encountered, while the waters surrounding Utoya became a frantic attempt at escape for some. Even then, safety remained uncertain, as many survivors later recounted how he fired at those trying to swim away, sinking their bodies beneath the waves amid the relentless gunfire. Norway's elite police unit, the Delta Force, swiftly arrived on the scene, and to everyone's surprise, the assailant surrendered without resistance. He was taken into custody with an unnervingly calm demeanor, as if he had simply completed his mission. Although the nightmare was over, the scars left on the nation would endure. Following the arrest, the country was left in stunned silence. The horror of the events was almost impossible to comprehend. The bombings in the capital had already sent shockwaves throughout Norway, but the massacre on Utoya surpassed anything the country had faced before. Survivors, many of them young teenagers, emerged from hiding in shock, some drenched and trembling from swimming across the fjord, others smeared with blood, either their own or that of friends who hadn't survived. Parents who had sent their children to the camp, expecting a weekend of discussions and outdoor activities, were now desperately calling, eager for news that was slow to come. Emergency responders worked tirelessly to secure the island and evacuate the injured. Helicopters with searchlights cut through the darkening sky as rescue boats scoured the shoreline for those who had fled into the water. Ambulances lined the ferry dock, ready to transport the wounded to nearby hospitals. Amid the chaos, medical teams operated with precision, stabilizing victims and offering psychological support to those overwhelmed by shock. Some survivors couldn't speak, trembling from fear and exhaustion, while others collapsed into the arms of strangers, their cries echoing across the water. In Oslo, news of the tragedy spread rapidly, compounding a nation already devastated by the earlier attack. Norwegians struggled to process that an even larger horror had unfolded just hours later. Media outlets hurried to piece together the sequence of events, initially speculating that foreign terrorist groups might have been responsible. But as more details emerged about the attacker's arrest, the focus shifted. It became clear that this was not the work of international extremists. Instead, it was the act of a Norwegian citizen, one of their own. As law enforcement interrogated the suspect, the full scope of his carefully planned assault was revealed. Years of preparation, stockpiling weapons and explosives, and drafting a manifesto that detailed his motives and methods. The extremist ideology outlined by the attacker reflected years of radicalization and meticulously planned violence. His target selection was deliberate. He chose symbols of what he saw as Norway's betrayal of its cultural identity, the government district in Oslo and the youth camp on Utoya. To him, these sites represented the multicultural and liberal values he despised. His actions were not impulsive, but the result of a long buildup of resentment and conviction. Authorities searched his residence and discovered disturbing evidence, including a manifesto titled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence. This 1,500-page document explained his beliefs and justified the attacks. He viewed himself as a crusader against what he called the Islamization of Europe and blamed Norway's Labour Party for policies he believed endangered national heritage. The manifesto was more than a personal diary. It served as a call to arms, intended to inspire others to follow his lead. Analysts reconstructed how he had executed the plan. He spent months acquiring materials like fertilizer and chemicals, covertly purchased, under the guise of running a farming business, and trained himself in weapons handling and tactics to ensure efficiency when the moment came. His choice to wear a police uniform on Utoya was not only practical but psychological, intended to create hesitation among his victims and lower their defenses just long enough for him to strike. Following the tragedy, Norwegian leaders, including Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, addressed the nation with messages of resilience and unity. They emphasized that Norway would not be defined by hatred, but by its commitment to democracy and social cohesion. Despite the country's peaceful reputation, questions emerged about how such a large-scale attack could have gone undetected. Critics pointed to delays in police response, particularly the time it took for special forces to reach Utoya, citing logistical hurdles like limited transport and communication issues that hampered rescue efforts. There was also debate over whether Norway's justice system was prepared to handle a perpetrator of this nature. As legal proceedings against him began, survivors and relatives of victims faced the daunting task of reliving that dark day. They listened in court as he explained his motives with apparent detachment, sparking determination among parents to be present at every hearing to ensure their loved ones would not be forgotten. The nation braced itself for the long and challenging process ahead. The difficult yet essential journey toward justice was marked by profound grief, but also by the resilience of the Norwegian people. As the country struggled to come to terms with its darkest chapter, the strength and unity of its citizens shone brightly. Candlelight vigils honored the victims, flowers blanketed city squares, and heartfelt messages of love and solidarity adorned fences near government buildings in Oslo. A movement of defiance, not fear, emerged, standing resilient against the hatred that had sparked the tragedy. Despite this collective strength, a lingering question persisted. Could such an event happen again? Norway had been caught unprepared for the horrors of July 22, 2011, and now faced the challenge of preventing a recurrence. As the trial of Anders Behring Breivik approached, Norway found itself under international scrutiny. The world watched not only because of the enormity of the attack, but also to see how Norway's justice system would handle the man responsible for its worst act of violence. The country took pride in a legal philosophy prioritizing rehabilitation over harsh punishment. Yet, what did that mean for someone like Breivik, who had coldly taken 7 lives and showed no remorse? Could justice truly be fulfilled through a system that avoided life sentences? In Norway, the maximum term for any offense, even mass murder, was just 21 years. An exceptional provision called preventive detention allowed indefinite extensions if the individual was deemed a continuing threat. For many Norwegians, even the possibility that Breivik might one day be released caused unease. Several victims' families worried that, given the country's leniency, a loophole could one day free him. Nevertheless, Norway upheld its principles. Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg emphasized that responses to such acts would not be driven by revenge, but by democracy, openness, and love. In the months after the attack, the nation stood firm, refusing to let hatred divide them. Instead, thousands gathered in memorial services, singing peaceful songs that defied Breivik's ideology. Their message was clear. He had failed to fracture their unity. In fact, he had only strengthened it. The trial commenced on April 16, 2012, drawing intense international attention. Dressed in a suit, Breivik entered the courtroom with unsettling composure, displaying a cold smirk and occasional fascist salutes as he recounted his crimes in detail. His purpose was not merely to defend himself legally. He sought to justify his actions, spreading his extremist views and explaining his targeting of government officials and young members of the Labour Party. He aimed to make the world listen to his twisted ideology. Yet Norway refused to grant him the platform he sought, steadfast in its refusal to give space to his hatred. Despite his efforts, he did not amplify his voice as he had hoped, but survivors of the Utoya massacre bravely recounted their traumatic experiences. Some had hidden beneath beds or behind rocks, trembling as they listened to the sounds of gunfire, knowing that those who couldn't escape quickly enough would be overwhelmed. Others described the agonizing choice to swim for safety, painfully aware that those falling behind risked drowning. Parents, overwhelmed by grief, tearfully recalled the final moments when their children's phone calls abruptly ended with gunshots and silence. Buer trained silently, showing no outward emotion, insisting he harbored no remorse. He claimed his actions were part of a fight against multiculturalism, immigration, and what he deemed the destruction of Europe's cultural identity. His complete lack of remorse shocked even those expecting the worst. Psychiatrists were consulted to assess his mental state, their evaluations becoming a central focus of the trial. One team diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, suggesting he might be found criminally insane and thus institutionalized rather than imprisoned. However, a second team disagreed, asserting that he was fully responsible for his choices. Ultimately, the court deemed him sane and sentenced him to 21 years in prison, with the possibility of indefinite extensions. For many, this seemed an inevitable outcome given the severity of his crimes, and it was widely believed he would never be released. Nonetheless, the trial symbolized Norway's unwavering commitment to justice, due process, and dignity, even when confronting unimaginable acts of violence. Unlike authoritarian regimes, Norway refused to surrender its core values. Buer was incarcerated in solitary confinement at Isa prison, yet he continued to seek attention, filing lawsuits claiming his conditions were inhumane. He complained about lacking a PlayStation 3 and cold coffee, arguing that his isolation violated his human rights. These grievances were mostly met with ridicule, especially by the victims' families, who would forever mourn their loved ones. Nevertheless, the court recognized that some aspects of his detention did breach certain human rights standards, though this had little effect on his actual confinement. He remained highly monitored, with every movement carefully controlled, transforming him into a lingering presence in Norwegian society. The attack left a profound mark on the nation, prompting a re-examination of policies concerning extremism, law enforcement response, and prison sentences. Security measures were bolstered, and efforts to prevent radicalization increased markedly. More importantly, the tragedy sparked a cultural shift. a collective resolve to defend democracy and confront hatred. Educational programs incorporated lessons on tolerance and extremism's dangers, aiming to foster understanding and resilience. The survivors' courage and the nation's renewed focus on unity and human rights became enduring symbols of Norway's unwavering commitment to its values. A decade after the attack, Norway reaffirmed its resilience as a nation of peace and renewal. Memorial ceremonies were held annually in Oslo and on Utøya, where the names of the victims were solemnly read aloud. The island, once a site of unimaginable anguish, was reclaimed by the nation as a symbol of strength and hope. The physical scars of the violence had faded, the bullet holes were gone, but the collective memory endured, serving as a testament to the unwavering spirit of Norwegians. The perpetrator had intended to break Norway's unity and instill widespread fear, but instead the country demonstrated its resilience. Though the wounds inflicted could never fully disappear, Norway emerged more united and steadfast in its commitment to democracy and peace. The individual had aimed to be remembered as a formidable figure, yet history would record him solely as a symbol of failure, a man whose legacy was defined by his destructive actions, not victory. Similarly, in 2011, Taiwan's judicial system faced intense scrutiny due to the long and fraught case of Chu Ho-san. Convicted of a crime dating back to 1989, Chu had spent over 20 years on death row amid multiple retrials and appeals. The case raised serious questions regarding judicial integrity, with persistent allegations of forced confessions and misconduct shadowing the proceedings. The events trace back to 1987 when a young boy was kidnapped and tragically murdered, igniting national outrage. Under intense public pressure, authorities arrested Chu and several others, accusing him of masterminding the crime to extort ransom from the victim's family. During interrogations, Chu and his co-defendants reportedly endured severe abuse, beatings, sleep deprivation, and threats, yet their confessions were accepted as evidence. Later investigations suggested these confessions were obtained through coercive methods. But despite this, the court convicted Chu, sentencing him to death. His legal fight stretched over decades, drawing attention from human rights advocates, both locally and internationally. New forensic evidence cast doubt on the legitimacy of the links made between Chu and the crime scene. Several key witnesses recanted, admitting they had been forced into false testimonies. Despite mounting concerns about procedural fairness, Taiwan's judiciary repeatedly rejected appeals to overturn the conviction, each time delaying the execution. As the years passed, the case became emblematic of potential miscarriages of justice, sparking debate on the reliability and fairness of the legal process. By 2011, Chu's situation had become one of Taiwan's most debated legal cases, reminiscent of wrongful convictions elsewhere. He remained confined in solitary, awaiting his final fate, emblematic of a justice system grappling with profound doubts about its own integrity. Amid growing international pressure, organizations like Amnesty International actively called for Taiwan to abolish the death penalty, highlighting Chu Ho-san's case as a stark example of potential judicial errors. However, the Taiwanese government faced a difficult dilemma. While global attention emphasized reform, domestic opinion largely favored preserving capital punishment, especially in prominent cases. Chu's case became more than just a legal matter. It became a reflection of Taiwan's evolving views on human rights and its willingness to confront past injustices. As legal experts analyzed every detail of the case, a persistent question lingered. Had an innocent man been condemned to die? Over time, Chu's situation symbolized Taiwan's broader struggle between respecting its legal traditions and responding to international calls for more humane justice standards. The controversy deepened with each legal challenge and new discovery revealing significant flaws in the judicial process. Advocates tirelessly pointed out that much of the evidence used against Chu was based on questionable testimony and flawed procedures, raising doubts about the fairness of his conviction. A particularly disturbing aspect was the heavy reliance on confessions obtained under coercion. Witnesses reported being blindfolded, restrained, deprived of sleep, and subjected to physical abuse, including beatings and electroshocks to force confessions. Some testified about psychological pressure and threats against their families, with Chu himself claiming to have endured prolonged torment before finally succumbing. Despite reforms designed to prevent the use of forced admissions, legal authorities reaffirmed his guilt, arguing that the confessions aligned with known details of the crime. Chu's defense team argued that much of the case relied on statements influenced by police pressure, with authorities dismissing or overlooking inconsistencies. Forensic evidence, once considered decisive, was increasingly discredited upon later review. Investigators initially linked Chu to the crime through hair and fiber evidence, but subsequent analysis using outdated methods failed to conclusively connect him. Experts later confirmed that the forensic findings did not definitively establish his involvement, leaving lingering doubts about the integrity of the entire case. A man was discovered to have no proven link to the crime, yet Taiwan's courts remained steadfast in their ruling, unwilling to consider the possibility of a wrongful judgment. The nation's judicial system was under intense scrutiny, pressure mounting from all sides. If this conviction were to be overturned, it could cast doubt on many other cases decided in a similar manner over the years. For decades, confessions had served as the foundation of criminal convictions in Taiwan, and overturning this case might threaten the legitimacy of numerous past verdicts. Outside the courtroom, opinions among the public were divided. Some believed that the man was indeed guilty and that the judiciary acted correctly, while others viewed him as a victim of an antiquated, flawed system. His situation became a symbol for advocates calling for rejection of capital punishment, sparking protests not only for his release, but for a comprehensive overhaul of Taiwan's justice procedures. International organizations, including Amnesty International and the Taiwan Association for Human Rights, joined these appeals, urging the government to revisit the case with fairness and transparency. They emphasized that as Taiwan aimed to position itself as a progressive democracy respecting human rights, executing someone under dubious circumstances was unacceptable. The European Union also voiced its opinion, recommending the abolition of the death penalty altogether. Despite mounting criticism and global concern, Taiwan's government was cautious, hesitant to take definitive action. Capital punishment remained a sensitive political issue, with officials fearing that pardoning the man would be seen as an acknowledgement of widespread judicial flaws. Nevertheless, over time, the demand for reform intensified, leaving the government no choice but to confront the reality that this case was unlikely to vanish quietly. The man, now elderly after more than 20 years behind bars, remained committed to claiming his innocence, though exhaustion had taken its toll. In interviews, he spoke of the lost years, the anguish of knowing that his future had been decided by a judicial system reluctant to admit its mistakes. He recounted the loneliness of death row and the daily uncertainty of life, each morning waking to the question of whether it would be his last. His story struck a chord with many, fueling debates about whether Taiwan's death penalty system could truly serve justice. Over time, more cases emerged where individuals had been convicted under questionable circumstances, some even executed before new evidence surfaced. By 2011, global attention on Taiwan's justice practices grew sharper. The authorities could no longer ignore increasing calls for fairness. They faced a crucial decision: to exonerate a man convicted under questionable conditions, or to uphold a verdict tainted by decades of legal misconduct. Taiwan now stood at a pivotal crossroads, with the outcome bearing significant consequences for its justice system's credibility and its standing on the world stage. The mounting pressure on Taiwan's judicial system intensified as human rights advocates, activists, and international observers scrutinized Chu Huan's case, pointing out startling inconsistencies and raising grave doubts about whether true justice had been served. His legal team, despite numerous setbacks, remained committed, submitting yet another appeal that called for a comprehensive reinvestigation. They argued that if Taiwan aspired to be recognized as a modern democracy that upholds human rights, it could no longer ignore a case that starkly exemplified the dangers of wrongful conviction. Public outcry persisted, yet the government hesitated to intervene. Deeply rooted in established legal precedents, Taiwan's judiciary was reluctant to admit such a fundamental mistake. To overturn Chu's conviction would be to acknowledge systemic failure, a miscarriage of justice that had kept an innocent man in solitary confinement for over 20 years, constantly awaiting what could be his final day. Recognizing that confessions obtained under duress should have never been accepted as evidence, and that forensic science had been misused to justify a wrongful sentence, was a painful but necessary acknowledgement. Inside prison, Chu's days followed the routine of confinement and silence. Although he had adapted to his limited surroundings, the psychological weight of the constant threat of execution bore down on him. Over the years, he watched fellow death row inmates be taken away, their sentences carried out swiftly and without warning. The fear that he might be next haunted him still. His survival, he thought, was no longer just for himself, but also a stand against injustices in Taiwan's justice system. A crucial turning point arose when new forensic analyses revealed flaws in the evidence used to convict him. Independent experts reviewed the initial findings and found that forensic methods employed at the time were outdated, inconsistently applied, and lacked reliability. Tests on hair and fiber samples, which had supposedly linked him to the crime, were improperly conducted, and no DNA evidence placing him at the scene existed. These revelations strengthened the argument that his conviction was based on fabricated or coerced testimony. During this period, legal scholars and human rights advocates called openly for Taiwan to reconsider its reliance on the death penalty. Chu's case became a prominent example illustrating the inherent risks of capital punishment. If an innocent person could be executed due to flawed evidence, the entire system was fundamentally flawed and dangerous. Despite these mounting voices, many in Taiwan continued to view the death penalty as a necessary measure for the most heinous crimes, and efforts to abolish it faced substantial political resistance. Nevertheless, the case of Chu Huan began reshaping public opinion. The notion that an individual could be sentenced to death due to errors and misconduct highlighted the profound flaws within the system. His story became a powerful catalyst, fueling debate about justice, human rights, and the future of capital punishment in Taiwan, prompting many to question long-standing assumptions and to advocate for meaningful reforms. Without solid proof, many protests demanding judicial reform grew more frequent as media coverage renewed attention on Taiwan's broader issues with wrongful convictions. Investigations into past cases revealed that Chu was not an isolated victim. Other inmates had been convicted under questionable circumstances, some even executed before their flaws were fully uncovered. The legal process dragged on, with courts hesitant to overturn convictions. Some judges argued that despite inconsistencies, the case had already exhausted legal procedures, while others feared that any exoneration for Chu might trigger a wave of appeals, threatening the credibility of Taiwan's judiciary. As international pressure mounted, the government was compelled to reconsider. In late 2011, judicial authorities announced they would undertake a formal review of Chu's case. Though this did not mean an immediate release, it marked the first tangible acknowledgement that serious errors had occurred. Alongside, the government proposed broader reforms, including protections against coercive confessions and stricter oversight of forensic evidence. These changes, while belated for many affected by the flawed system, signaled a move toward justice and prevention of future injustices. Chu Shan's case, however, continued to face legal delays, with bureaucratic hurdles obstructing resolution. Nonetheless, support grew among legal experts and politicians calling for his immediate freedom. By year's end, mounting pressure made it clear that Taiwan could no longer ignore his plight. In subsequent years, his case highlighted the nation's struggles with justice, becoming one of the most documented miscarriages that showcased the risks of prioritizing speed over fairness in legal proceedings. Though justice had been delayed for decades, Chu's ordeal sparked a movement advocating accountability, reform, and the recognition that no system is flawless. As 2011 drew to a close, Chu remained incarcerated, still fighting for the justice he had long been denied. His future remained uncertain, yet it was evident that his case had profoundly transformed Taiwan's approach to justice and legal integrity. In another story, a 36-year-old woman named An Soon was known for her quiet demeanor and restrained emotions, even around those close to her. She had spent years building a life of stability, working diligently, maintaining friendships, and trying her hand at business ventures. Beneath her composed exterior, however, something darker festered. In 2011, Singapore was stunned by the shocking revelation that she had committed a horrifying act, taking the life of a longtime friend and former lover selling Sweden. What appeared to be a friendship founded on trust had suddenly dissolved into tragedy, exposing deep-rooted fractures beneath their shared history. Tori Young and Sun Ying first crossed paths in 1995 during their studies at NG and Polytechnic, forging an immediate and profound friendship built on shared interests and long, late-night conversations. Over time, their bond deepened beyond simple friendship, and in 2010 they embarked on a short-lived romantic relationship. Although that chapter ended, they remained very close, choosing to cohabitate in a condominium on the west coast of Singapore. Both women were driven and diligent. One had launched a cafe with a friend in 2009, a venture that was eventually short-lived due to other commitments, but reflected their mutual ambitions. Ong, a lively and energetic property agent, was known for her vibrant personality and relentless dedication, while Sun Ying, more reserved, worked meticulously in her own field. Despite their strong appearance, subtle tensions simmered beneath the surface, unnoticed by outsiders. Friends later revealed that Sun Ying was contemplating moving out, sensing their friendship had become strained. Conversely, Ong appeared reluctant to let go, with rumors swirling about financial disagreements, unresolved feelings from their past, and hints of envy, though she insisted she could manage the situation. Few foresaw the danger lurking beneath her calm exterior. On the night of the tragic event, Ong's demeanor had taken a startling turn. Witnesses later described her as unusually tense in the days before, withdrawing from social life and conversations. An argument erupted inside their shared residence, escalating far beyond a mere disagreement. When neighbors heard muffled sounds of unrest, it was already too late. Authorities discovered Sun Ying's lifeless body inside, her injuries indicating a brutal assault. Shock rippled through the city as Ong, her former closest companion, stood in disbelief, her hands tainted by the irreversible consequences. The investigation not only uncovered the details of the crime, but also revealed the fractured nature of their relationship. What had motivated Ong to commit such an act? Was it premeditated, or had something inside her finally shattered? Police tirelessly examined text messages, financial records, and testimony to understand the motives. People who knew both women struggled to reconcile the image of Ong as a quiet, diligent individual with that of a perpetrator. She had never exhibited outward aggression, even under stress, preferring retreat over confrontation. Yet, those close to her sensed that her relationship with Sun Ying had been deteriorating for months, possibly years. The signs were subtle: disagreements over expenses, misunderstandings, growing emotional distance. Behind closed doors, things appeared much more strained. An acquaintance from her real estate firm later confided that Ong had expressed feelings of being suffocated and controlled, hinting at underlying tensions. Although she never described her as violent, moments of quiet resentment, long silences, and passive-aggressive remarks seemed to amplify over time. She delayed her plans to move out, partly for convenience and to avoid conflict, but her friends believed she underestimated the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Additionally, investigations uncovered lingering financial disputes stemming from the cafe venture, debts, contributions, risks taken that added complexity to the situation. While Ong was financially independent and successful in her career, her friends observed her growing withdrawal and occasional bitterness, even as she refrained from explicitly blaming Sun Ying. On the night of the crime, security footage captured her entering their apartment around 9:30, marking the start of an event that would forever change their lives and send shockwaves through Singapore. Less than an hour later, neighbors heard what seemed like furniture being moved and muffled shouts. Such sounds were common in apartment buildings, so no one paid much attention at first. However, what was dismissed as a minor disagreement would later be revealed as the final moments of Ong's life. She later told investigators that the altercation began over a trivial matter an unpaid bill, or a resurfaced old grievance. As tensions rose, years of suppressed emotions surfaced, possibly prompting her to voice her decision to leave for good. To her, this might have felt like a profound betrayal or abandonment she could not accept. Eventually, the argument turned physical, and the evidence from her injuries indicated a lengthy struggle. Defensive wounds on her arms and hands suggested she fought back fiercely. Bloodstains found throughout the apartment pointed to the struggle moving from room to room. In a fit of uncontrolled anger, Ong overpowered her friend, delivering the fatal blows that ended her life. When the police arrived, alerted by a concerned neighbor checking on the disturbance, they found Ong sitting silently on the floor with a vacant expression. She did not attempt to escape nor resist arrest, as if the weight of her actions had just begun to fully hit her. During interrogation, her responses were detached and mechanical. She confessed to the killing but struggled to explain her motives, describing feelings of being overwhelmed as if something inside her had broken, leaving her unable to stop herself. Detectives understood that this was not a random act, but the result of long-standing internal conflict, an explosion of unaddressed emotions overflowing after years of stagnation. Whether Ong had premeditated the act or if it was simply an impulsive burst of rage remained a vital question. Forensic evidence revealed signs of planning. A wiped-clean knife was hidden back in its drawer, and blood-stained clothing was discarded hastily in a laundry basket. These details suggested she had taken deliberate steps to hide her involvement, whether to compose herself or out of instinct. Was this a calculated act, or was it impulsive desperation? The evidence remained inconclusive, but one fact was certain. Aung San Suu Kyi was no longer alive, and Ansoon was responsible. The next step was for the legal authorities to assess her guilt and determine the appropriate consequences. In the courtroom, a solemn atmosphere prevailed as the judge entered, and the gravity of the case weighed heavily on everyone present. Ansoon sat rigidly, her face emotionless. Months had passed since her arrest. While mental health evaluations and legal preparations continued, each side gathering the details to support their case. Her case, amplified by media coverage, had transformed her from a seemingly reserved, unremarkable woman into a figure of both intrigue and horror. Once perceived as modest and unobtrusive, she became infamous for the brutal act committed against her closest friend. The trial commenced with the prosecution meticulously outlining their case, depicting her as driven by intense jealousy, resentment, and a deep fear of abandonment. They highlighted ongoing financial disagreements, the emotional distancing between them, and her difficulty in letting go of someone who had been a constant presence for more than a decade. Witnesses testified about her plans to relocate and her negative reactions to that prospect, emphasizing a history of emotional suppression that often erupted unexpectedly. Evidence from the crime scene was introduced, including photographs of bloodstains, overturned furniture, and defensive wounds on her body. Prosecutors argued this was no impulsive accident or fleeting rage, but possibly a premeditated act she'd been contemplating. They pointed out signs like her attempt to clean the weapon, change her clothes afterward, and her passive silence immediately following the event, a possible indication of her awareness of her actions. In contrast, the defense painted a different picture, that Dong was a woman battling severe psychological struggles, heavily reliant on her victim for emotional support, who had suddenly snapped under the pressure of losing her. Psychologists called by the defense explained that her mental state was compromised by long-standing emotional dependency, depression, and instability, which impaired her ability to think clearly during the incident. They argued her actions were impulsive, not planned, driven by overwhelming unresolved feelings. Throughout the proceedings, Dong mostly remained silent. When she did speak, her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. She expressed remorse, though the prosecution suggested her regret stemmed more from being caught than genuine sorrow. When questioned about her motives, she struggled to provide an explanation, merely stating, "I don't know," and admitting she simply lost control. The jury deliberated for several hours, considering the detailed arguments. The prosecution's case portrayed her as a calculated, cold-blooded perpetrator, while the defense emphasized her emotional fragility and impulsiveness. Ultimately, the court found her guilty of culpable homicide not amounting to intentional murder. Recognizing her mental health issues and absence of prior criminal record, the judge sentenced her to 18 years in prison. It was not a life sentence, but it marked a significant legal judgment. The case served as a stark reminder that even closest relationships can turn toxic when emotions go unchecked, with repercussions that can be devastating. It was a painful spectacle for Ang's family and friends, who struggled to understand how someone they trusted could be capable of such a tragedy. Many felt that the sentencing was insufficient, believing justice had not been fully achieved. Others, however, viewed it as a tragic outcome driven by mental health struggles and emotional turmoil, with no winners in the aftermath. In the years following the trial, concerns around mental well-being, domestic conflicts, and the complexities of human relationships became more prominent in Singaporean society. This case illuminated the dangers of emotional dependence, the warning signs of relationship breakdowns, and the destructive potential of repressed anger. Over time, Ang's name gradually faded from the headlines, and she served her sentence quietly, seldom speaking publicly or appealing her case. After her release, she disappeared from view, her life forever impacted by her actions. Yet, for those who had followed the story closely, the memory of that tragic incident in the West Coast condominium remained vivid, serving as a haunting example of how love, trust, and resentment can intertwine in the most tragic ways. Moving to a different story, 17-year-old Matthew Molinas was a student at College Seoul, carrying a deep and hidden past. Beneath his calm and bright exterior lurked a history of aggressive tendencies, including a prior conviction for a serious offense involving another young girl in 2010. Due to his age, he was given a second chance, a decision that ultimately proved to be a grave mistake. Authorities permitted him to continue his studies at the prestigious Lush Chaman Sur Lignan School, known for its progressive values and diverse student body. This choice allowed him to move forward, but it also set the stage for a tragic event. In 2011, Matthew's past resurfaced in the most horrific way with the brutal assault and murder of 13-year-old Agnes Moren. The school, which fostered growth and second chances, did not know of Matthew's previous offense, as his parents had fought to keep his history private, believing he deserved to be judged by his present rather than his past. Agnes was a lively, well-liked girl, full of enthusiasm and charm, who had only recently begun her journey at College Seoul. She had already made numerous friends and seemed to thrive despite her youth. On the evening of November 16, 2011, Matthew invited Agnes and a small group of friends to gather, setting the stage for a heartbreak that shocked the community and shattered the ideals of second chances. On a routine walk near the woods, students frequently explored the area, relishing the sense of freedom that came with their boarding school life. During one such stroll, Matthew persuaded Agnes to linger with him while the others headed back to campus. What transpired next would remain an unsolved mystery, pieced together only through forensic evidence and Matthew's eventual confession. When Agnes didn't return that evening, her friends quickly noticed her absence, prompting them to raise the alarm. Teachers and students launched a search, growing increasingly anxious as hours passed. By the following morning, authorities became involved, and the search intensified further. Soon, suspicion focused on Matthew, as he had been the last person seen with Agnes. His behavior grew more unstable, and when questioned, he provided evasive answers with inconsistencies starting to surface. Under mounting pressure, he finally disclosed the location of a hidden spot deep within the woods, where authorities discovered Agnes's lifeless body. The scene was gruesome. She had been assaulted and murdered, left concealed beneath leaves and branches, seemingly attempting to hide evidence. The overwhelming forensic findings, DNA samples, bloodstains, and Matthew's own admission confirmed his guilt. It was also revealed that Matthew had a prior conviction for a sexual offense, a detail that had been sealed from the school's record. This revelation sparked widespread outrage, raising questions about how someone with such a history was allowed back into society so easily. Many wondered if the justice system had failed Agnes, and whether it had contributed to the tragedy. Investigations revealed that this act was not impulsive. Matthew had intentionally lured Agnes into the woods, and his past offense once dismissed as an isolated mistake, served as a warning that had gone unheeded. Now a young girl was lost, and the community grappled with the painful realization that this tragedy might have been prevented. The uncovering of Matthew Molina's background ignited intense debate across France. His prior conviction, coupled with his subsequent enrollment in school, was seen as a severe systemic failure. Parents of other students demanded accountability, questioning how a known offender was allowed to study alongside their children without anyone being informed. The truth was chilling. Matthew had been given a second chance, but at the devastating cost of innocence. As police continued their investigation, new and troubling details emerged. Evidence indicated that Matthew had not only planned his attack, but had taken deliberate measures to conceal his actions. For example, forensic analysis suggested that he had brought a tool with him that night, signaling that his intentions had been set long before Agnes entered the woods. As his online activities grew more intense, it became evident that a dark fascination was developing within him. He had researched infamous crimes, studied forensic methods, and even watched tutorials on how to erase evidence, illustrating a disturbed mindset that had been forming long before the tragic event. The night Agnes went missing, several students recalled seeing Matthew walking alone on campus. His behavior appeared altered, more reserved and withdrawn. Some noticed scratches on his hands, but he dismissed them casually. No one foreseen the terrible truth lurking behind his quiet facade until it was far too late. In response, the school issued a statement expressing remorse, claiming they had no prior knowledge of his troubled past. They trusted references from his former school and reassurances from his family. However, many felt this explanation fell short. No adequate safety protocols had been established, and no background checks had been performed. A known predator had been placed in a setting filled with potential victims, with no steps taken to prevent such a tragedy. The case quickly attracted widespread media attention, transforming into a national controversy. News outlets scrutinized everything from Matthew's childhood experiences to the policies that had allowed his reintegration. The justice system faced intense debate. Why were his previous convictions not managed more strictly? Should he have remained under supervision? Should he have been free at all? These questions ignited fierce discussions, with some defending rehabilitation for juvenile offenders, while others argued that certain crimes should forever exclude individuals from unrestricted societal reintegration. Matthew's family faced severe public condemnation. Their efforts to keep his past hidden only deepened their blame. Interviews with relatives painted contrasting pictures. Some described him as a troubled but intelligent boy, struggling with uncontrollable emotions. Others depicted a manipulative individual who had mastered hiding his true nature until the moment for violence arose. As the trial approached, Matthew remained mostly silent. He was held in a detention facility, undergoing psychological assessments to determine whether his actions resulted from mental health issues or deliberate intent. Some reports indicated he showed little remorse, while others noted private moments where he appeared to break down. Yet, when questioned directly, he offered no clear explanation, only stating, "I don't know." His words haunted everyone involved, revealing a disturbing detachment that intensified the fear surrounding the case. This was not merely a crime driven by passion or desperation. It reflected a troubling weariness with the boundaries of morality, raising profound questions about the safeguards in place and the nature of human intent. A darker act of calculated cruelty unfolded, a chilling experiment in malevolence where no one had intervened before, allowing the perpetrator to repeat his heinous actions. Matthew Molina sat quietly in the courtroom, his face an impassive mask as the judge read aloud the charges against him. The weight of the offense was tangible, filling the room with a heavy silence. Agnes Marin's family sat somberly nearby, their faces pale with grief and restrained emotion, each breath revealing their profound sorrow. Across from them, Matthew's parents appeared equally devastated, yet the public sentiment was less sympathetic. They had previously shielded their son from accountability, only for an innocent girl to suffer the consequences. The prosecution wasted no opportunity, meticulously presenting their case. They detailed how Matthew secretly lured Agnes into the woods, how he had assaulted her, and then strangled her until she became unresponsive. Damaging photographs of the crime scene depicted stained foliage, her partially hidden body beneath dirt and branches. The evidence was compelling. DNA from his clothing matched Agnes's blood. Scratch marks on his hands indicated a struggle, and his online searches suggested he had researched similar offenses shortly before the incident. Despite this, Matthew showed little emotion. His defense team argued that he had acted due to an untreated psychological condition, claiming he did not fully comprehend his actions. A forensic psychiatrist testified that he exhibited signs of antisocial personality disorder, but the prosecution countered that such a diagnosis did not absolve responsibility. He was aware of his conduct, had concealed his crime, and attempted lies during questioning. It was evident this was not a moment of lost control, but a deliberate act by someone with predatory intent. Agnes's family was then given the chance to speak. Her parents took the stand, trembling as they described their vibrant daughter, a girl filled with love and brightness now gone too soon. Her mother clutched a photograph of Agnes, her hands shaking as she expressed her heartbreak. She trusted him. We trusted the system and those meant to protect her, and now she's gone, she said in a trembling voice. Her words echoed, casting a heavy silence over the courtroom. Outside, the case sparked widespread outrage. Protesters gathered in front of the courthouse, calling for stricter laws concerning juvenile offenders. The ongoing debate over second chances flared anew. Some believed the system had failed Agnes just as much as her attacker, while others insisted that certain crimes permanently mark a person as dangerous regardless of age. The trial spanned several weeks, but the verdict was clear from the outset. The jury took only a few hours to reach a guilty verdict on charges of assault and homicide. The judge sentenced Matthew to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 30 years, one of the strictest sentences possible for someone his age. Yet for many, this still fell short of the justice they sought. Agnes's life was cut tragically short when she was only 13, yet Matthew, even within the confines of prison, was expected to live many more years. Her case remained a haunting reminder of the devastating outcomes that can arise from neglecting early warnings of danger. In response, authorities implemented new policies requiring more thorough background checks for students with criminal records, aiming to prevent similar tragedies. Still, no reform could bring back Agnes. Her family's grief persisted, their loss etched into their memory. To honor her, a modest memorial was erected in her hometown of Luchcham in Sur-Lignan, serving as a quiet tribute to a young life taken too soon. In a different story, 28-year-old George Zimmerman resided within the gated community of The Retreat at Twin Lakes in Sanford, Florida. As the neighborhood watch coordinator, he often reported what he perceived as suspicious activity. On the evening of February 26, 2012, Zimmerman was in his vehicle when he noticed a teenage boy walking through the neighborhood. The young man was Trayvon Martin, visiting his father's fiancée after returning from a nearby store where he bought Skittles and an iced tea. Armed with a legally owned handgun, Zimmerman called the police to report a suspicious individual, noting that the teen was wearing a hoodie and walking slowly, seemingly looking around. When asked if he was following the boy, Zimmerman confirmed he was, and police instructed him not to pursue. Despite this, Zimmerman left his vehicle, and what happened next remains debated, with conflicting testimonies and scant eyewitness accounts. During the dispute, residents heard shouts and sounds of a struggle, followed by a single gunshot. When authorities arrived, they found Trayvon Martin lying face down, fatally shot in the chest. Zimmerman, with visible injuries, including a bloody nose and head wounds, claimed self-defense. Initially, law enforcement officers did not arrest him, citing Florida's Stand Your Ground law, which permits the use of lethal force if someone believes their life is in danger. This decision sparked widespread outrage, as many believed racial bias influenced the case. Trayvon, who was unarmed, had his family and civil rights activists demanding justice, arguing that Zimmerman racially profiled him and provoked the confrontation. As media coverage increased, protests erupted nationwide, with justice for Trayvon becoming a rallying cry. Prominent figures, including then-President Barack Obama, joined the debate over race and self-defense laws in America. After intense public pressure and further investigation, Zimmerman was eventually charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter. The case garnered unprecedented media attention, making it one of the most scrutinized trials of its time. Recent high-profile criminal cases in the United States have often divided public opinion and sparked vital debates about race, gun regulations, and justice. The trial of George Zimmerman, which commenced in June of year 2013, drew intense national attention and became one of the most scrutinized legal proceedings in recent memory. During the trial, prosecutors claimed Zimmerman had racially profiled Trayvon Martin and acted as a vigilante, provoking the altercation that resulted in the teenager's death. They depicted Zimmerman as an overly eager neighborhood watch volunteer who disregarded police instructions and pursued Martin, leading to a tragic confrontation. The prosecution argued that Martin, who was unarmed, was simply returning home when Zimmerman approached him, triggering a series of events that ultimately turned deadly. Zimmerman's defenders insisted their client acted in self-defense. They maintained that Martin had attacked Zimmerman first, knocking him to the ground and striking him repeatedly. To support this, they pointed to injuries on Zimmerman's face and head, which they claimed indicated he had been pinned down and beaten. Additionally, they highlighted Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, allowing individuals to use lethal force if they reasonably believed they faced imminent danger. The case relied heavily on forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and a chilling 911 recording capturing the moments before the shooting. In the recording, frantic cries for help are heard, followed by a gunshot. A key point in the trial was determining whether the voice calling for assistance belonged to Zimmerman's or Martin's. Martin's family asserted that the cries were Trayvon's, pleading for his life. Zimmerman's legal team countered that the voice was theirs, indicating their client was fighting for survival during the attack. With no definitive forensic proof, the jury was left to interpret the evidence. An important testimony came from Rachel Gintel, a close friend of Trayvon Martin, who had been on the phone with him moments before the incident. She testified that Martin had told her he was being followed by a creepy-ass cracker and was frightened. However, her credibility faced scrutiny due to inconsistencies and attacks from the defense. The defense also aimed to portray Martin as a potential threat, citing traces of marijuana in his system and past misconduct at school. Conversely, the prosecution argued such details were irrelevant, emphasizing that Martin was an innocent teen simply walking home when he was confronted and ultimately harmed. As the trial unfolded, it became evident that the case extended beyond the courtroom. It emerged as a symbol of broader societal issues within the United States, reigniting discussions about racial profiling, gun laws, and the right to defend oneself. The protests and demonstrations persisted, with activists and public figures donning hoodies to show solidarity with Trayvon Martin and to demand justice. This case also sparked the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, which would go on to become a powerful voice advocating for racial equality in later years. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, a jury composed of 6 women, 5 of whom were white, deliberated carefully before announcing their verdict. The nation watched with bated breath as the judge read the decision. George Zimmerman was deemed not guilty of both second-degree murder and manslaughter. This ruling shocked many and ignited widespread frustration, though some viewed it as a lawful application of the state's legal standards. In response, protests erupted across major cities nationwide, with demonstrators condemning what they perceived as a failure of the justice system to hold Zimmerman accountable for ending an unarmed teenager's life. Despite his acquittal, Zimmerman's life was profoundly affected. He remained a highly controversial figure, involved in additional legal issues and public disputes. Meanwhile, Trayvon Martin's parents, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, became prominent advocates, channeling their grief into efforts to spur reforms in racial justice and gun legislation. The case of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman left a deep imprint on American society, exposing stark divisions and shaping ongoing debates about race, self-defense, and the legal process. Even years later, it continues to be referenced in discussions on racial inequality and policing practices in the United States. Beyond the courtroom, this event challenged the country to confront difficult truths about itself and its justice system. The verdict's aftermath generated intense emotional reactions. Some people defended the decision as fair, while others viewed it as an injustice that perpetuated the criminalization of young black men. Demonstrations spread from New York to Los Angeles, with thousands taking to the streets to demand reform and accountability. The case also reignited debates on the Stand Your Ground law, which played a key role in Zimmerman's defense. This law, present in Florida and over 20 other states, permits individuals to use deadly force if they believe they face an immediate threat, often without any obligation to retreat. Critics argued that such legislation disproportionately harmed black Americans by providing legal cover for lethal actions against unarmed victims under self-defense pretenses. Efforts to challenge and amend these laws gained momentum, but resistance from gun rights supporters and conservative politicians largely prevented substantial legislative changes in most states. Through these tumultuous events, the case underscored the ongoing struggles and divisions in American society regarding justice, race, and gun control, leaving a legacy that continues to influence national conversations today. Tracy and Sabrina Martin transformed their profound grief into a powerful movement aimed at combating racial injustice and gun violence. They established the Trayvon Martin Foundation, which focuses on raising awareness and fostering change. Sabrina Fulton emerged as a prominent voice in social justice circles, speaking at key events and working tirelessly to help other families avoid enduring similar pain. She often reflected on how unimaginable it was that her son's brief life would ignite a national call for reform, yet she remained resolute in turning tragedy into advocacy. Meanwhile, George Zimmerman, the man responsible for Trayvon's death, became a highly contentious figure. Despite being found not guilty, Zimmerman struggled to maintain a private life and frequently found himself entangled in legal issues, including arrests for domestic disputes and aggressive conduct. His attempts to profit from his notoriety, such as auctioning the firearm used in the shooting and making provocative public statements, further fueled public outrage and controversy. One of the most significant outcomes of this case was its role in sparking the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Although concerns about racial inequality had long persisted, the killing of Trayvon Martin and Zimmerman's acquittal galvanized activists, inspiring widespread grassroots efforts. The phrase Black Lives Matter first appeared as a social media hashtag in 2013 and quickly grew into a national movement demanding justice for black Americans harmed or killed in encounters with authorities or vigilantism. Momentum grew with subsequent incidents, including the deaths of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York City. Trayvon's story resonated deeply across American society, becoming a defining moment for politicians, celebrities, and cultural leaders. Then, President Barack Obama spoke about the case in deeply personal terms, noting, "Trayvon Martin could have been me," a statement that highlighted how many black Americans saw their own lives reflected in his fate. His circumstances prompted widespread expressions of solidarity, such as athletes like LeBron James and his team wearing hoodies, and musicians referencing Martin in their lyrics, fueling ongoing conversations about race and justice. The legacy of Trayvon Martin continues to influence debates about racial injustice, police practices, and self-defense laws. His parents authored books, participated in conferences, and connected with other families touched by gun violence. Their efforts led to scholarships and programs designed to create opportunities for black youth, ensuring Trayvon's name remained a symbol of resilience and the fight for fair treatment. Despite these advances, systemic change in the legal landscape has remained slow. Calls for reform intensified, yet cases resembling Trayvon's, unarmed black individuals fatally shot under similar circumstances, continue to emerge. Disputes over racial profiling and law enforcement practices remain deeply rooted and divisive, with no clear resolution in sight even more than a decade later. Trayvon Martin's story continues to stir profound emotions, symbolizing the ongoing fight for racial fairness and justice in America. His death was not merely the loss of a 17-year-old boy, it sparked a national reckoning with uncomfortable truths about the justice system, societal biases, and core values. The grief of his family, the widespread protests, and the movement that mobilized in his name serve as enduring reminders that history is shaped as much by those who stand against injustice as by those in power. Today, his hoodie, the Skittles in his pocket, and the iced tea he carried remain poignant symbols of a life cut short too soon. Although tragic, his story continues to inspire successive generations to seek a world where no one is judged or targeted solely because of their skin color. In another story, Ark Bridger, a 46-year-old former slaughterhouse worker, resided in a modest cottage on the outskirts of Mainly, Wales. Known locally for performing odd jobs and socializing in the town's pubs, he appeared to many as a friendly and helpful individual. Yet others sensed a darker side, marked by a history of failed relationships, a tendency to fabricate stories about his life, and an unsettling obsession with young girls. His computer was later discovered to hold disturbing images, including material involving harmful acts toward children, revealing sinister intentions well hidden beneath his outward demeanor. On the 1st of October 2012, in the quiet market town of Mackle, Bridger spotted 5-year-old April Jones playing near her home. She was outside riding her pink bicycle with friends, savoring the last hours of daylight. Their community was close-knit, allowing children to play freely without concern. While watching the children, witnesses saw a man in a Land Rover speak to April, who then willingly entered the vehicle. It seemed innocuous at first. Perhaps she knew him or he was a familiar face, and yet April never returned home. Her parents, Coral and Paul Jones, immediately realized she was missing, plunging into a frantic search throughout the neighborhood, calling her name and knocking on doors. When efforts to locate her proved unsuccessful, authorities were contacted, leading to one of Britain's largest search operations in history. Hundreds of volunteers scoured fields, rivers, and woodland, desperately seeking any sign of the young girl. The investigation rapidly focused on Bridger, whose vehicle matched descriptions provided by those who saw April enter the car. When police arrived at his residence, they found him attempting to destroy evidence, ashes and burnt fragments in his fireplace that were later identified as parts of April's clothing. DNA evidence recovered from his home confirmed her presence. Additionally, investigators uncovered a disturbing collection of images and other incriminating evidence on his computer, highlighting the severity of his intentions and the tragic outcome of the case. Bridger's refusal to disclose what truly happened to April Jones fueled much suspicion. Initially, he claimed that he had unintentionally run her over and subsequently could not recall what he did with her body. However, forensic evidence quickly contradicted his account. Investigators deduced that he likely lured April into his vehicle with the purpose of assault, then quickly ended her life and disposed of her remains in a manner designed to ensure they would never be recovered. The search for April stretched on for months, involving thousands of volunteers, police officers, and local residents. They scoured dense forests, riverbanks, and isolated areas, desperately hoping for a breakthrough. Once a serene and secure community, Mainly was overwhelmed by grief and fear, with ribbons, candles, and photographs of April filling the town streets as her parents kept their hopes alive. Yet, as weeks passed, it grew painfully apparent that April would not return home safely. This tragic case sent shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom, sparking urgent conversations about children's safety, monitoring of sex offenders, and the dark realm of the internet where predators like Bridger lurk unseen. The nation watched in silent sorrow as the trial unfolded, seeking justice for April and solace for her grieving family. The trial of Mark Bridger, which commenced in April of 2013, stood as one of the most emotional and devastating legal proceedings in recent British history. Courtrooms were crowded with journalists, legal experts, and members of the public, all eager for answers about the crime that had stunned the nation. At the heart of the proceedings sat April's parents, Coral and Paul Jones, who maintained an unshakable dignity despite the profound loss that etched their faces with sorrow, confronting the brutal reality of their daughter's death. Prosecutors presented a chilling case, revealing disturbing details about Bridger's character and actions. They portrayed him as a man with violent tendencies, former employment at a slaughterhouse, and a disturbing obsession with young girls. His computer seized during investigation contained hundreds of illicit images, including photographs of April taken from her family's social media accounts prior to her disappearance. Authorities also uncovered searches related to past child murder cases involving notorious offenders, further painting a disturbing profile of Bridger's depraved interests. Key forensic evidence played a pivotal role in the trial. Despite Bridger's claim of accidental involvement, investigators found blood matching April's DNA in his living room, along with bone fragments in his fireplace. Experts confirmed these remains were consistent with the charred partial remains of a young human body. Additionally, knives and cutting tools discovered in Bridger's home strengthened the case that April's death was not accidental but deliberate, likely occurring after she was abducted with the intent of assaulting her. The evidence strongly implied that Bridger had murdered April to conceal his crimes, with the tragic consequence that justice for the young girl was ultimately served through legal proceedings. Bridger remained consistent in his account, insisting he had no memory of disposing of April's remains. He suggested that trauma might have caused him to forget the details. His defense argued that the abduction was not premeditated and that her death resulted from an accident. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable. His erratic conduct before and after April's disappearance, disturbing material found on his computer, and bloodstains uncovered in his home all pointed to a grave wrongdoing with deliberate attempts to conceal it. Throughout the trial, public sentiment was one of horror and disbelief, fueling intense media coverage. In the community, widespread sympathy was shown through the use of pink ribbons, a symbol of remembrance and unity with April's family. The small town of Mylith, once calm and serene, became the epicenter of a tragic event that captured national attention. Vigils held in her honor and donations to support her grieving parents reflected the depth of collective sorrow. The residents, haunted by the lengthy search efforts, grappled with the harsh reality that one of their own could commit such a grievous act. As the verdict approached, the jury faced a difficult task, determining not only Bridger's guilt, but also whether his actions had been planned in advance. Given the extensive evidence, the decision seemed clear-cut, yet April's parents knew that true closure hinged on uncovering her final moments and the whereabouts of her remains. Despite exhaustive searches, her body had never been recovered, leaving her family with a profound sense of unfinished mourning. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent. Mark Bridger was convicted of abduction, murder, and obstructing justice. The judge described him as a manipulative, sadistic individual who had taken an innocent life and inflicted lifelong suffering on her loved ones. By refusing to reveal her burial site, he compounded their agony. Sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, Bridger's fate was sealed. Outside, crowds gathered, commending the justice served, yet the ache of loss remained. April's murder left an indelible mark on the community and her family, who would carry their grief forever. The case ignited nationwide debates on safeguarding children, internet safety, and prevention strategies for future tragedies. Pink ribbons continued to adorn the town as a quiet tribute to the girl whose presence once brightened their streets, her laughter echoing in memories. Though justice was achieved, April's absence was felt in every home and playground, reminding everyone of the importance of protection and vigilance. Her name became a lasting symbol of the urgent need to keep children safe everywhere. The case of April Jones, whose abduction and tragic loss deeply touched Wales and the entire UK, remains a stark reminder of society's vulnerabilities and the importance of safeguarding children. Her family, still mourning the loss of their young daughter, committed themselves to ensuring no other child would face such a fate, tirelessly advocating for increased awareness of child protection and online safety within seemingly safe communities. For Coral Jones, April's mother, the pain endured over the years transformed into a driving force behind efforts for legislative reform, aiming to enhance protections for children nationwide. One of the key results was a push for stricter regulations concerning online content that can influence dangerous behavior, especially after revelations surfaced during the perpetrator's trial. that obsessive fixation on young girls had been fueled by disturbing material accessed on the internet. This case awakened public concern, prompting calls for social media platforms, internet providers, and law enforcement to do more in monitoring and restricting access to harmful content. The government responded by toughening laws against illegal material, increasing funding for cybercrime units, and imposing harsher penalties on offenders caught with such content. April's tragic case also raised questions about individuals with a history of violent tendencies, even if their past convictions were not severe. Bridger, while not having committed major offenses before, was known for deception and troubling behaviors towards young girls. This prompted discussions about establishing better systems to identify and monitor potential predators before they could cause harm. Some advocating for a register of individuals found with exploitative material, enabling earlier intervention to prevent future tragedies. Despite these legal and policy advancements, the most painful aspect remained that April's remains were never fully recovered. Her family faced the heartbreaking reality that her body had been destroyed without the opportunity for proper farewell. Search efforts across rivers, forests, and reservoirs yielded only a few bone fragments, leaving her loved ones with a haunting knowledge that her remains had been discarded so cruelly. The brutality of her disposal left a scar that time could not entirely mend. Over the years, the community, once known for its scenic beauty and strong bonds, struggled with the aftermath of this harrowing crime. Many residents who had taken part in the search for April found it difficult to forget the memories of that tragic chapter, forever linking their peaceful landscape with one of the darkest moments in recent British history. During those dark days, parents grew more cautious, closely monitoring their children, and a lingering sense of lost innocence hovered in the air. Despite the ongoing routines of everyday life, memories of April's laughter, her love for playing outdoors, and the sight of her riding her pink bicycle remained frozen in the hearts of those who knew her. To honor her memory, her family and the community established the April Jones Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about child safety and preventing exploitation. Across the UK, schools invited Coral Jones to share April's story, and her efforts contributed to the development of stronger policies aimed at safeguarding children from potential predators. Public awareness campaigns urged parents to stay vigilant about their children's online activities, turning cases like April's into lasting warnings rather than mere tragedies. Meanwhile, Mark Bridger remained imprisoned, despised both by fellow inmates and the general public. His refusal to fully disclose what happened to April fueled ongoing frustration and outrage, and due to the nature of his crimes, he was kept under strict security measures, as individuals responsible for such offenses are often targeted. Reports indicated he had been assaulted multiple times in prison, a grim fate for a man who had caused profound heartbreak and ruined countless lives. April's legacy extended far beyond her small community. Her case transformed how authorities handle missing children reports and investigations into child abductions, while also prompting increased oversight of online content to better protect the vulnerable. In many ways, she became a symbol of the urgent need to shield innocent lives from harm. Her favorite color, pink, grew to symbolize remembrance, and each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, many in the UK wore pink ribbons to honor her memory. For Coral and Paul Jones, life was forever altered. Their home, once filled with April's joyful laughter, now stood as a painful reminder of what was lost. Yet, amid their grief, they found strength to advocate for change, ensuring her tragic loss would serve a purpose. They tirelessly campaigned for stronger laws and kept her memory alive through every effort they made. As years passed, the pain remained fresh. On what would have been her birthday, they lit candles, pored over old photographs, and imagined the girl she might have become. They held on to her bright smile, her passion for bicycling, and the warmth of her embraces. Though April Jones was no longer with them, she would never be forgotten. Her story, tragic and heartbreaking, left a lasting impact, serving as a stark reminder of the darkness that can threaten innocence, but also of love, resilience, and the unwavering determination to protect the vulnerable. Throughout his career, Lim was respected for his disciplined leadership and unwavering dedication to Singapore's emergency response teams, which included firefighting, rescue operations, and paramedic services. His professional reputation was impeccable, earning him the trust of colleagues and superiors alike. Behind this polished image, however, lurked a darker reality. He was deeply embroiled in a web of corruption that would soon shake the foundation of Singapore's civil service. In early 2012, an internal probe conducted by the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau uncovered disturbing misconduct. Evidence showed that Lim had exploited his authority for personal enrichment, engaging in dishonest dealings with vendors supplying equipment and services to the Singapore Defense Force. In return for lucrative contracts, he received personal favors, lavish entertainment and services of a more private nature. The scandal sent shockwaves across the nation, which prided itself on strict laws and zero tolerance for corruption. The revelation emerged when anonymous tips flagged irregularities in procurement procedures within the Singapore Civil Defense Force. An investigation confirmed that Lim had granted preferential treatment to certain companies, accepting benefits in exchange for contractual advantages. Investigators gathered compelling evidence, including recorded messages, meeting notes, and financial transactions that indicated a pattern of corrupt practices spanning several years. As details of the case became public, confidence in Singapore's civil service was profoundly shaken. Leaders who are usually held to the highest ethical standards found themselves under scrutiny. The suspicion that a senior officer had abused his position for personal gain raised serious concerns about oversight and accountability within the system. Lim was detained and faced multiple charges related to corruption in what would become one of the most prominent legal proceedings in recent Singaporean history. During the trial, more information about his misconduct surfaced, painting a troubling picture of a man entrusted with safeguarding the nation's citizens, who instead prioritized personal pleasures over duty. His fall from grace was not just a personal setback, but an embarrassment that highlighted vulnerabilities within an otherwise transparent and efficient government. The case prompted urgent questions about internal controls, auditing systems, and the potential for abuse inside even the most esteemed institutions. Ultimately, the proceedings aimed to expose the full scope of Lim's misconduct, including the complicity of associated organizations and systemic weaknesses, revealing the challenges in maintaining integrity at the highest levels of public service. As the case unfolded, Singapore was on high alert, witnessing a landmark trial that challenged the nation's dedication to integrity and justice. The proceedings centered not solely on holding one individual accountable, but on reaffirming the country's unwavering commitment to fair governance. As evidence accumulated, it became clear that Peter Lim's conduct had deeply compromised public trust. Prosecutors meticulously presented their case, revealing compelling proof of Lim's corrupt practices. His charges stemmed from granting preferential treatment to certain companies vying for contracts with the Singapore Civil Defense Force in exchange for personal advantages. Among these perks were not only financial benefits, but also personal services from women associated with the favored firms. The courtroom was filled with legal professionals, media representatives, and curious observers eager to watch justice unfold. The evidence portrayed Lim as someone who exploited his authority for personal gain rather than public service. It was revealed that he manipulated procurement processes, favoring selected vendors and bypassing established fairness and ethical standards. One of the most startling disclosures involved meetings with female executives from private firms already engaged with the SCDF. Initially presented as professional discussions, many of these meetings were held in private hotels or secluded locations. Witnesses, including some of the women involved, testified that Lim made it clear, either directly or indirectly, that business opportunities depended on personal favors. Several women confessed they felt pressured to comply, fearing that refusal might harm their company's chances of securing lucrative government contracts. Financial documentation, digital communications, and electronic records further supported the allegations. Messages retrieved from Lim's devices contained coded references to meetings and procurement negotiations with involved companies. Bank transfers and expense records indicated he received costly gifts and entertainment from executives, hinting at a quid pro quo for contract awards. The prosecutors emphasized that this was not an isolated pattern, but a consistent misconduct spanning multiple years. The defense countered by suggesting that Lim's relationships, though inappropriate, did not legally constitute corruption, asserting that the gifts and favors received were given voluntarily and without direct ties to specific contracts. They noted the complexity of the bidding process for SCDF contracts involving multiple stakeholders and procedures, implying that no single individual could be solely responsible for irregularities. Ultimately, the trial was a stark reminder of the importance of accountability at every level of governance and the ongoing need to uphold transparency within public institutions. While decision makers often argue that a single individual cannot guarantee specific outcomes, the prosecution effectively countered this perspective. They presented internal documents revealing that Lim had personally recommended certain contractors, indicating he used his influence to sway decisions. Testimonies from officers within the Singapore Civil Defense Force confirmed that Lim exerted considerable control over procurement processes, and some admitted to sensing irregularities yet hesitated to challenge a superior of Lim's stature. This culture of deference allowed him to act with little oversight for years, highlighting systemic vulnerabilities. Public outrage was swift and widespread, as Singaporeans, accustomed to stringent anti-corruption standards, expressed outrage that someone in Lim's position could operate with such impunity. Concern grew over whether the existing oversight mechanisms were truly sufficient to prevent future misconduct. Leading newspapers and editorial columns condemned the lapses in internal control and urged for tighter regulations to uphold high ethical standards among senior officials. In response, the government moved quickly to bolster transparency and integrity measures. The Civil Service Commission committed to strengthening internal audits and implementing additional training focused on ethics and responsibility for senior staff. Although Singapore consistently ranks among the least corrupt countries, Transparency International's watchdog noted that no system is completely immune to human flaws like greed or misconduct, especially at higher levels of authority. As the trial approached its final stages, irrefutable evidence accumulated against Lim. The prosecution's meticulous presentation, comprising documents, witness testimonies, and financial records, left little doubt that Lim had deliberately abused his power for personal gain. It was clear that he betrayed both his office and the public trust placed in him by the nation. The mounting evidence signaled an impending verdict, and Singaporeans anxiously awaited its outcome. Questions loomed. Would Lim face justice commensurate with his high-ranking role, or would his long service and stature influence the court's decision? Whatever the result, one fact was unmistakable. This case had dealt a significant blow to Singapore's reputation, serving as a stark reminder that even in a country renowned for integrity, corruption could still find a way in. In the final days of Lim's trial, tension gripped the nation. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, conclusively demonstrating that Lim had engaged in inappropriate activities during his time as head of the Singapore Civil Defense Force, leveraging his authority for personal benefits. His fate now lay entirely with the judge, and the country waited with bated breath to learn whether one of its most senior civil servants would be held accountable for his actions. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal experts, and members of the public as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. He began by summarizing the case, emphasizing that the prosecution had proven Lim had engaged in unethical conduct, exploited his authority to influence contract awards, and received undue benefits from suppliers. The judge highlighted that Singapore's reputation as a nation committed to integrity and zero tolerance for corruption made Lim's breach of public trust deeply egregious. When the judgment was announced, reactions varied. Some expressed relief, while others felt disappointment about the fall of a leader who was once highly respected. Throughout the proceedings, Lim showed little visible emotion. However, those close to him observed that his rigid posture concealed feelings of profound shame and remorse. He had built a career on discipline and leadership only to see it unravel in a humiliating manner. Shortly after, the court sentenced him to prison and imposed a substantial fine. The judge clarified that Lim's misconduct not only tarnished his personal reputation, but also undermined public confidence in Singapore's institutions. A firm punishment was deemed necessary to send a clear message: corruption, regardless of rank, would not be tolerated. Lim was led away in handcuffs, his proud stature diminished to that of a disgraced figure. Once entrusted with protecting the nation, he now found himself behind bars, a fallen former leader. In the weeks following, public discussion centered on the case. Many Singaporeans believed justice had been served, but also wondered how someone in such a high position could have operated undetected for so long. Concerns grew about whether other officials might have committed similar misconduct without yet being exposed. The government responded swiftly. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong reaffirmed Singapore's unwavering commitment to clean governance and emphasized that no one, not even top officials, was above the law. To prevent future violations, authorities announced a series of reforms. These included enhanced oversight of procurement procedures, stronger protections for whistleblowers, and mandatory ethics training for senior civil servants. The Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, which played a key role in bringing Lim to justice, received additional resources to strengthen its investigative capacity. Meanwhile, Lim's personal life faced public scrutiny as friends and former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be linked to his name, which had become a symbol of disgrace. His family grappled with the fallout, emblematic of the profound impact the case had inflicted on all involved. Once a respected leader within Singapore's civil defense, Lim's fall from grace was as swift as it was devastating. Constantly hounded by media eager for comments, he faced relentless scrutiny about his scandal. His wife, who initially stood by his side, eventually chose to divorce him when she could no longer reconcile the man she knew with the one revealed in court while he was serving time. His transition into prison life proved to be a harsh reality check. Unlike the structured discipline of the Singapore Civil Defense Force, where he had once held authority, he was now simply another inmate subjected to strict routines and constant supervision. Former law enforcement colleagues, once respectful, began to regard him with disdain. Some sources suggested that within the prison, he was targeted by others who viewed him as a hypocrite, someone who had upheld the law while secretly violating it for personal gain. Despite the scandal, Singapore's institutions responded decisively, swiftly demonstrating that corruption would never be tolerated regardless of rank. This transparent handling reassured the public and reinforced the country's commitment to integrity and governance. Even years later, in discussions about corruption, Lim's name was frequently cited as a stark warning. His case became a recognized example used in educational settings, illustrating the peril faced by even the most trusted officials when morality is compromised. Lim's prison term eventually concluded, but his life was irrevocably altered. Stripped of his rank, reputation, and privileges, he faded into relative obscurity, forever haunted by his past. Once admired by the nation, his legacy was overshadowed by betrayal, serving as a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance in maintaining ethical standards. In stark contrast, Adrian Ernest Bailey's history was marked by repeated acts of violence and a continued pattern of legal trouble. Born in Australia, Bailey spent much of his life cycling through the correctional system, accumulating numerous convictions for assault and sexual offenses. Despite being labeled a dangerous individual, he was released repeatedly, continuing to pose a threat to those around him. His most notorious act occurred in 2012, when he was involved in one of Melbourne's most shocking crimes. Bailey murdered Jill Marr, a 29-year-old Irish expatriate who had moved to Australia with her husband in search of better opportunities. Jill was a well-loved journalist working for ABC Radio, appreciated by friends and colleagues alike. On the night of September 21st, she went out for drinks with colleagues in Brunswick, a lively suburb of Melbourne, planning to stay only a few hours before returning home. However, around 1:30 in the morning, her evening took a tragic turn, leaving the city stunned by the brutality of her murder. Jill chose to walk home alone, declining offers from friends to join her. Her house was close by, and Brunswick was generally regarded as a safe neighborhood. Yet, as she moved along Sydney Road, she remained unaware that Adrian Bailey was lurking nearby, watching her from the shadows. That night, Bailey had been prowling the streets, deliberately seeking out an unwary victim. He was a serial offender with a troubling pattern of attacking women, constantly evading the full extent of his punishment over the years. When he spotted Jill alone, he saw an opportunity. Surveillance footage later revealed him following her, his movements precise and predatory. As Jill approached her home, Bailey approached her, pretending to be friendly. When she resisted his advances, his demeanor shifted to aggression. Witnesses reported hearing a brief scuffle, but in the nighttime silence, no one realized the peril Jill faced. Bailey overpowered her, forcing her into a dark alley where he assaulted her before strangling her. For hours, her husband Tom waited at home, growing increasingly anxious as she failed to return. He repeatedly called her phone, but there was no answer. By morning, panic had set in, and he reported her missing to the authorities. The disappearance of a young woman in a usually safe area shocked the community. Friends, colleagues, and volunteers quickly organized search efforts, putting up posters and appealing for information. CCTV footage became crucial to solving the case, revealing Jill walking down Sydney Road, followed closely by a man in a blue hoodie. The chilling footage led police to identify the man as Adrian Bailey, a known offender with a violent past. Initially, Bailey refused to confess when questioned, attempting to mislead investigators. However, mounting evidence, including phone records placing him at the scene and the discovery of Jill's belongings at his residence, left him with no escape. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Bailey eventually admitted to his actions, describing in detail how he had attacked and ended Jill's life. Her body was later found in a shallow grave about 50 kilometers outside Melbourne, confirming the worst fears of her loved ones and the nation. The brutal nature of the crime shocked Australians, sparking widespread outrage and renewed debate over the justice system's ability to keep dangerous repeat offenders behind bars. As the trial approached, Bailey's extensive criminal record, including multiple prior offenses, became apparent. Despite this, he had been released from prison and allowed to re-offend. The revelation of his history drew fierce criticism of the parole system, with many arguing that tighter measures were essential to prevent such tragedies. For Jill's family and the community, this devastating event underscored the urgent need for reform and greater vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals. Her husband's grief was overwhelming, and Tom publicly questioned how someone like Bailey had been allowed to remain free on the streets. Driven by a desire for change, he became an advocate for justice reform, determined to ensure that no other family would suffer the same loss. As the trial drew near, the nation braced itself for the revelations of Bailey's extensive criminal past, eager to see justice served for Jill Marr. The justice system now faced the critical task of holding Adrian Bailey accountable for his pattern of violence. During the investigation, the full scope of Bailey's criminal history emerged, revealing a disturbing pattern of repeated offenses against women. Despite multiple convictions for violent sexual crimes, he had been released on parole, allowing him to continue his life outside prison walls. Public outrage grew as it became clear that this was not a first offense. Bailey had long been recognized as a predator, a repeat offender who used intimidation and brutality to control his victims. If authorities had acted more decisively in earlier cases, Jill Marr might still be alive. Prosecutors moved quickly to build a case, charging Bailey with murder, rape, and other related crimes. As proceedings unfolded, new and unsettling details surfaced. Evidence from the crime scene, combined with Bailey's own confession, painted a stark picture of a man who had not only attacked Jill, but done so with calculated ruthlessness. Surveillance footage showed him walking past her multiple times, carefully selecting the moment to strike when she was most vulnerable. Forensic experts testified about evidence collected from her belongings, her handbag and phone, found at Bailey's home, deepening the suspicion of his guilt. Soil samples from his vehicle matched the burial site, indicating he had transported her body to a remote location in an attempt to conceal his act. His DNA on her body confirmed he was the last person she was with alive. Bailey's defense had limited options, as he had already admitted to the crime. His lawyers argued that the murder was not premeditated, claiming the attack was spontaneous, and that he had not intended to kill her, but acted in a moment of panic after the assault. However, the prosecution swiftly countered, highlighting his extensive history of violence and predatory behavior, which undermined the defense's claims. Public reactions to the case were deafening, with protests and vigils held in Jill's memory. Thousands gathered to demand justice, turning the focus beyond her tragic loss to broader issues: violence against women, the shortcomings of the parole system, and the urgent need for tougher penalties for repeat offenders. The phrase "reclaimed the night" became a symbol of resilience as women across the country sought safety and justice. Across Melbourne and the wider Australian community, there was a rising demand for safer streets and increased protections against predators. Central to the public's response was Bailey Jill's husband, Tom Ma, whose grief was visibly overwhelming. Instead of retreating into silence, Ma chose to speak openly in interviews, sharing the profound pain of losing his wife and questioning how someone with Bailey's troubling past had been allowed to remain free. His heartfelt words struck a chord with many and spurred wide-reaching calls for justice reform. His advocacy ignited discussions at government levels about tightening parole regulations and implementing safer measures. As the court date drew near, media coverage intensively followed developments, revealing how Bailey had skillfully manipulated the legal system for years by securing early releases despite being classified as a high-risk offender. Experts debated whether systemic failures had contributed to Jill Ma's tragedy and whether stronger safeguards might have prevented such a loss. The case sparked a nationwide reflection on violence against women, prompting women across Melbourne to modify their routines, avoiding late-night walks, calling for better street lighting, increased police patrols, and stricter monitoring of convicted offenders. The incident marked a pivotal moment in Australia's ongoing struggle to address gender-based violence, emphasizing the urgency of comprehensive reform. In custody, Bailey faced hostility from fellow inmates, particularly those convicted of crimes against women and children, who often harshly targeted him. Reports indicated he had been assaulted multiple times behind bars, foreshadowing the severe consequences if he were to be convicted and sentenced to extended imprisonment. As the trial commenced, the country prepared for the harsh truths to unfold. Prosecutors aimed to present the brutal details of Jill Ma's final moments, with the public demanding justice and the maximum penalty for Bailey. For Jill's family and the nation, delivering justice was imperative. A failure to do so would be unforgivable. The gravity of the case became even clearer during the proceedings, especially considering Bailey's disturbing past. His previous convictions for multiple sexual assaults, coupled with his repeated parole grants, underscored a pattern of unchecked dangerousness. The court was presented with a stark profile of a man whose history reflected long-standing violence and disregard for safety, making it evident that opportunities to intervene had been missed, leaving devastating consequences in their wake. The case raised profound concerns about the failures within the parole system to keep such a dangerous individual confined. Questions emerged. How had he been allowed multiple chances to re-offend without facing more severe legal repercussions? Family and friends of the victim endured the painful proceedings. Jill's mother, Martina, had traveled from Ireland to be present, struggling to grasp how a young woman so full of potential and kindness could have been taken in such a senseless act. In an emotional statement to journalists, she described Jill as lively, passionate about her work, and deeply caring for others. To her, Jill's death symbolized not just a personal tragedy, but also a systemic failure that permitted her attacker to remain free. Jill's husband, Tom, remained a steady but visibly anguished presence in court. Throughout the trial, he demonstrated incredible resilience, yet the sorrow in his eyes was unmistakable. He spoke openly about the future they had envisioned. Dreams of traveling and growing old together, all shattered in an instant. Like many others affected, Tom had to come to terms with a life irrevocably changed by one person's violence. His quest for justice and his calls for reform brought attention to the broader implications of such crimes, highlighting the enduring pain inflicted on loved ones. Further investigation uncovered troubling details about Bailey's conduct in the days prior to the attack. Authorities found that he had been following women in the area, with Jill not being his initial target. He had been stalking multiple women before ultimately choosing Jill, whose background and reasons for becoming his focus remain unclear. The randomness and brutality of his actions underscored the peril posed by repeat offenders who often select vulnerable individuals in public spaces. Throughout the trial, Bailey's defense attempted to attribute his behavior to personal issues or mental health struggles. However, both prosecutors and the public dismissed this explanation. Bailey's history of violent tendencies indicated a pattern of deliberate actions. The evidence suggested that his assault was neither an impulsive lapse nor purely mental illness, but a conscious decision fueled by a blatant disregard for human safety. When it came time for impact statements, the courtroom fell into silence. Jill's loved ones shared their grief, emphasizing the profound loss her absence had caused. One friend remembered Jill as a radiant personality capable of making everyone feel special, her warm and welcoming nature leaving a lasting impression on those around her. Their words underscored the depth of the tragedy and the enduring pain caused by her loss. Her absence left a profound and irreplaceable void in the lives of many who had known and loved her. Countless heartfelt testimonies tinged with love and sorrow underscored the tragic senselessness of Jill's passing and the deep impact it left on her loved ones. In stark contrast, Adrian Bailey appeared seemingly unfazed throughout the trial, displaying little emotion as evidence mounted against him. His detached and unemotional demeanor only reinforced the perception of him as a remorseless individual. The defense failed to offer a convincing explanation for his actions that night, and the weight of the evidence left little doubt about his guilt. When the jury finally began their deliberations, after considering all testimonies and evidence, the public and Jill's family waited anxiously. The moment the verdict was announced brought a complex mix of relief for many and sorrow for others. Adrian Bailey was found guilty on all counts, including murder, assault, and indecency. The judge expressed deep regret over the loss of such a vibrant young life and emphasized the importance of holding repeat offenders accountable. Bailey was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for at least 35 years, a severe but necessary step to send a clear message that such acts would not be tolerated. Although Jill's family felt a measure of justice had been achieved, their grief was lasting. No legal penalty could restore her, and her life had been taken in a moment of senseless violence. Yet, many viewed the conviction as a small step toward preventing future tragedies and safeguarding others. In the wake of the trial, Australia's justice system faced increased scrutiny, sparking calls for reform. The devastating case of Jill Marr inspired a growing movement advocating for stronger laws and stricter policies on parole, aimed at preventing similar losses. For Tom Marr, the journey of mourning and advocacy had only just begun. He became a passionate supporter of justice reform, determined to ensure his efforts would help protect the vulnerable and prevent further victimization. Although the pain of losing Jill would never fade, he drew strength from his resolve to honor her memory through efforts that emphasized fairness and safety in the justice system. Jill Marr's potential and bright spirit continued to be remembered by those who loved her, fueling ongoing efforts for justice and security. The fight to ensure her memory endures and to prevent such tragedies from recurring remains persistent even as the pain of that tragic night lingers. April Jones, a bright and spirited 5-year-old girl, went missing on October 1st, 2012, in the quiet town of McKinnell. That evening, she had told her mother, Coral, that she planned to play with friends nearby and would return shortly. As hours passed without her arrival, Coral's concern grew into panic. The local community immediately mobilized, launching search efforts that extended across the surrounding area. Yet no trace of April appeared. Realizing her daughter was genuinely missing, Coral called the authorities, who quickly organized a comprehensive search. Volunteers from the neighborhood joined in, while police deployed helicopters, sniffer dogs, and even divers to explore nearby water sources. Despite these coordinated efforts, hope waned as days passed with no new leads. The investigation intensified, yet the case remained unresolved, fueling media coverage that cast a shadow over the town's peaceful atmosphere. The breakthrough occurred on October 2nd, when police detained Mark Bridger, Investigators found he had been in the vicinity on the night April vanished. After several interviews and searches, evidence emerged pointing to Bridger's involvement. His confessions were fragmented. He admitted to kidnapping April and claimed to have taken her for a ride. Later, he revealed that she was no longer alive, and his inconsistent statements ultimately led police to human remains. Forensic tests confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to April, transforming the case from a missing persons mystery into a tragic murder investigation. The arrest of Bridger stunned the community. Although he had previously been investigated for minor issues, no one suspected he was capable of such violence. Locals described him as a lone individual who kept to himself, and until that moment, there had been little indication of his potential for harm. There was little indication of any violent tendencies within him. His community knew him as a seemingly ordinary individual. Yet the fact that he had lived among the same neighbors as April, while concealing such sinister intentions, sent shockwaves of fear and disbelief through the town of Menina as the investigation unfolded. Authorities soon uncovered that Bridger had meticulously planned the entire act. On the night April went missing, he was driving through the area and happened upon her while she played outside with friends. Exploiting the situation, he lured her into his car, gaining control of her fate from that moment onward. The brutality of the crime left both law enforcement and the public stunned and appalled. Despite his efforts to hide his involvement, washing his vehicle and destroying items potentially connected to the crime, evidence continued to mount. Forensic analysis uncovered traces of April's blood in his car, and a subsequent search of his home revealed further incriminating evidence. The news of April's demise devastated her family and gripped the nation, exposing the fragile vulnerabilities children face even in quiet, seemingly safe communities. Her parents, Coral and Paul Jones, struggled to come to terms with the loss of their young daughter. The tragedy prompted them to speak out about the urgent need for increased vigilance in safeguarding children and for stricter penalties for such heinous acts. The case captured widespread attention across the United Kingdom, with thousands following every detail of the investigation. As the trial drew nearer, the entire nation anxiously awaited justice for April. When Mark Bridger's trial commenced in 2013, the courtroom was filled with tension. The proceedings laid bare the disturbing details of the young girl's abduction and death, with each revelation darker than the last. Bridger faced charges of kidnapping, assault, and murder of the 5-year-old girl. The prosecution's case was built on extensive evidence, painting a grim account of Bridger's actions on the night April disappeared. He had driven around the small town of Mackle, carefully seeking an opportunity. Witness testimonies, surveillance footage, and Bridger's own statements depicted how he saw April playing outside her home and exploited her innocence. He convinced her to come into his car, claiming to have seen her parents, and she, unaware of any danger, climbed inside. From that point, the investigation revealed that Bridger harbored no intention of returning her safely. His plans for her abduction were methodically executed. The details of his motives and actions shocked the public and emphasized the profound vulnerability of children in their own communities. The prosecutor underscored the brutality of the crime, emphasizing that Bridger had kept her at his residence for several hours before deliberately ending her life. His apparent lack of remorse for his actions was striking, especially as he made efforts to erase all evidence in an attempt to hide his involvement. Throughout the trial, Bridger's absence of empathy was painfully evident. When questioned by police about his motives, his responses were often incoherent and nonsensical. He claimed he had never intended to hurt her, yet his behavior told a different story. Evidence collected at his home revealed signs of preparation for the act, and a pattern of troubling, inappropriate behavior was identified through expert analysis, pointing to long-standing predatory tendencies. Although his defense argued that he experienced a temporary lapse in judgment, the vast amount of evidence presented painted a stark picture of premeditation and calculated cruelty. The prosecution highlighted Bridger's post-crime actions, such as hours spent attempting to hide the evidence, washing his vehicle, and burning clothes that could have been contaminated, indicating he was fully aware of his guilt and intent on evading detection. Nonetheless, forensic evidence was irrefutable. DNA traces of the victim were found in his car, and her blood was discovered on his clothing, contradicting any claims of spontaneous or uncontrolled behavior. The defense's portrayal of Bridger as someone who had momentarily lost control was met with skepticism. His history of erratic and predatory behavior suggested plans rather than impulsivity. His complete lack of remorse and persistent efforts to conceal the crime confirmed that his actions were deliberate. As the case approached its conclusion, the jury faced the critical decision of determining Bridger's sentence. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. For April's parents, Coral and Paul Jones, the trial marked a long journey through grief and uncertainty, yet they showed extraordinary resilience. Throughout the proceedings, they attended each day, enduring painful testimonies while remaining committed to justice. Their strength was evident in their unwavering focus on advocating for stronger protections for children and warning others about the dangers of abduction. In a final, heartfelt statement, April's parents described her as a joyful, loving child full of potential. They shared the deep sorrow that now filled their lives and the profound void left by her absence. Despite their suffering, their voice remained resolute as they sought to honor her memory and promote awareness, hoping to prevent such tragedies in the future. April's tragic loss could never be remedied by any court ruling, but her family hoped that their unwavering pursuit of justice might serve to protect other children from facing a similar fate. After days of careful deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mark Bridger was found guilty of the murder, abduction, and sexual assault of April Jones. As the court's decision was announced, a heavy silence fell over the room. For many, this guilty verdict represented a small measure of acknowledgement for a devastating loss, a young girl whose life was suddenly stolen. During sentencing, the judge condemned Bridger's actions as cold and calculated, describing the crime as among the most heinous the court had encountered, and emphasizing the immense grief it inflicted upon April's family and community. Bridger was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of release, ensuring he would never again threaten the safety of others. Although this sentence brought some relief, the pain of losing April remained, and nothing could compensate for her absence. Her memory endured as the community of Mainley, along with the entire United Kingdom, mourned the tragic end of a young life. In the wake of April's death, discussions surrounding child safety, abduction risks, and the necessity for stronger protective laws intensified. Her case starkly illustrated the vulnerabilities children face even amid seemingly secure surroundings, highlighting the urgent need for precautions to safeguard them. The ripple effects of April Jones's case resonated nationwide, shaping public discourse on how society must respond to such tragedies. As the trial concluded, the bittersweet relief of justice was overshadowed by the enduring grief and void her absence created. The proceedings exposed the cold brutality of Bridger's actions, leaving an indelible mark on those following the case. Public response, media coverage, and child protection organizations poured out their support and concern, revealing systemic shortcomings in preventing such disasters. Across the country, many rallied behind April's family, expressing their sorrow and solidarity. Her family's grief struck a chord with countless others, sparking calls for change. In the aftermath, Coral and Paul Jones became advocates for safeguarding children. They dedicated themselves to campaign for stricter regulations concerning individuals with criminal histories and for more vigilant monitoring systems, hoping to prevent future tragedies and ensure that no family would suffer as they had. Previous offenses by individuals involved in advocacy work underscored the critical need for improved systems to monitor those deemed dangerous. Additionally, they highlighted the importance of comprehensive education for parents and communities about the risks of abduction and effective response strategies. The efforts of the Jones family ultimately led to the creation of the April Jones Foundation, dedicated to enhancing child safety and preventing abduction incidents. This organization collaborated closely with law enforcement, child welfare agencies, and schools to raise awareness about the dangers children face and to provide valuable resources for guardians and communities. Through their work, the Jones family transformed their grief into a catalyst for meaningful change, ensuring that April's memory contributed to making the world a safer place for young ones. The foundation also championed legislative reforms aimed at reducing similar crimes, prompting discussions about improving the justice system, particularly in how repeat offenders are managed. Many critics argued that the parole process failed in the case of Mark Bridger, whose prior behavior raised concerns, yet he was still released into society. His history of inappropriate conduct and alcohol-related issues should have served as red flags, but his release exemplified the risks of underestimating individuals exhibiting predatory traits. The media played a vital role by extensively covering the case, emphasizing preventative measures and extending support to the grieving family and community. Public grief and solidarity revealed the profound loss felt over the tragic loss of a young life, captured through interviews, news reports, and social media discussions. Such coverage served as a stark reminder of life's fragile nature and the importance of vigilance in safeguarding society's most vulnerable members. For the residents of Mayanle, the catastrophe exposed a harsh reality. What once seemed a safe haven suddenly felt vulnerable, and the community, accustomed to walking freely without concern, was shocked by the abduction, prompting a collective reevaluation of safety. In response, local groups and residents mobilized to enhance security, launching neighborhood watch programs and community outreach initiatives aimed at educating both children and parents about safety protocols. While these efforts helped restore a sense of security, the incident served as a sobering reminder of the constant need for awareness and precaution in protecting children from unforeseen dangers. As the community began its process of healing, it also recognized the deep wounds inflicted by the crime, which touched everyone, friends, families, and neighbors who had known April. Her bright smile and promising future, tragically snatched away, became a poignant symbol of the urgent need for stronger child protection measures. The case prompted a broader societal debate about the influence of social media in cases of child abduction. In the days following April's disappearance, online platforms played a crucial role in raising awareness and mobilizing public aid, yet they also sparked concerns about ethical reporting and the responsibilities of responsible media coverage. Balancing the urgent call for awareness with respect for the privacy of grieving loved ones emerged as a delicate issue for professionals and advocates alike, highlighting the importance of sensitivity during such tragedies. Over time, the memory of April continued to motivate advocates and reinforce the vital importance of safeguarding children. Her story stood as a stark reminder of children's vulnerability and the need for vigilance. The heartbreaking loss of April Jones remains one of the most devastating moments in the history of child abduction cases in the United Kingdom. Nevertheless, her legacy inspired ongoing efforts aimed at safeguarding future generations from similar tragedies. Standing as a story of grief intertwined with resilience and proactive change, her case spurred societal shifts in perceptions of child protection and improvements in preventative systems. Although Mark Bridger's conviction offered a measure of justice, it could never undo the profound devastation he caused. Grief for a mother who lost her daughter, disappointment for a father robbed of his future, and a community forever altered. However, through their efforts to honor April's memory, her family and supporters embedded a lasting commitment to creating a safer world for children. Their actions serve as a powerful reminder that the fight for justice extends beyond legal outcomes and continues through ongoing advocacy, awareness, and activism. In 2012, Mark Bridger, a 46-year-old former slaughterhouse worker from Machel in Wales, lived a quiet life in a secluded cottage. His troubling past, marked by alcohol abuse and inappropriate behavior, seemed uneventful to the local community, as there were only brief investigations into incidents suggesting unsettling tendencies. Yet no one could have predicted the horrific crime he would commit. On October 1st that year, Bridger's life intersected with that of 5-year-old April Jones. Her abduction and subsequent tragedy shocked not only their small town, but the entire nation. April, a bright and curious child, had been playing outdoors near her home in Mackle, a peaceful Welsh town known for its safety, when her life was tragically altered forever. On a quiet evening in April, the close-knit community's life changed forever when young April told her mother, Coral, that she planned to spend time with friends and would return shortly. This was the last moment Coral saw her daughter alive. When April failed to return that night, worry quickly turned into panic. As hours passed, Coral and nearby neighbors organized frantic searches through local neighborhoods, calling out her name, desperately hoping she would come back. With each passing minute, the night grew colder and concern deepened, prompting Coral to alert the authorities, who immediately launched a comprehensive search involving police, volunteers, and even helicopters. Despite their efforts, no trace of April appeared. The following days blurred into a tense period of frustration and sorrow. Police meticulously examined the area, questioning witnesses and analyzing evidence, but no significant leads emerged. Then, unexpectedly, on October 2nd, suspicion turned toward a man named Mark Bridger when he was seen in the vicinity during April's disappearance. His name quickly arose as a person of interest. Initially, there was no concrete proof linking him to the case, but troubling details kept him in investigators' focus. As the investigation progressed, forensic analysis uncovered a disturbing discovery: traces of April's blood in Bridger's vehicle. This critical evidence strengthened the case against him, revealing that he had not only taken April, but had done so with calculated intent. Bridger eventually admitted to abducting her, though his confession was inconsistent, claiming he had no intention of causing harm. Yet the evidence told a different story. After seizing April, he had taken her to his home, holding her there for several hours before her tragic death. Bridger's execution of the crime was meticulous. He attempted to conceal his involvement by destroying clothing and washing his car. When police searched his residence, they uncovered further disturbing evidence, some linked to previous inappropriate conduct. Although he possessed no formal record of offenses against minors, the evidence suggested a troubling pattern of predatory behavior. The investigation took a further grim turn on October the 5th, when authorities uncovered human remains in an area marked by Bridger's direction. Forensic tests confirmed that these remains belonged to April. This heartbreaking discovery finalized the case. The young girl had been abducted and murdered, leaving the community devastated and the case etched into their memories. The heartbreaking details of April's death shocked everyone, leaving her family devastated and her small town of Manley in a state of disbelief. Known for its peaceful nature, the community was shaken by the brutal crime that shattered their sense of safety. When Mark Bridger was taken into custody and April's remains were found, the case shifted from a search for a missing girl to a grim investigation into her death, prompting national outrage over the cruelty involved. As the investigation unfolded, chilling insights into Bridger's actions emerged both in court and the media. The trial, which began in early 2013, proved to be an intensely emotional ordeal for April's relatives and the entire community, now forever marked by the tragedy. In the aftermath of April's disappearance, Bridger's behavior was disturbingly cold. He went about his daily routine as if nothing had occurred, cleaning his vehicle and disposing of clothes worn during the abduction. However, forensic analysis contradicted his efforts to conceal evidence. Traces of April's blood were found in his car, matching her DNA. One of the most shocking revelations was Bridger's conduct during his initial police interview. He initially denied any involvement, claiming ignorance about her whereabouts. Yet, as investigators presented increasing evidence, his responses grew more evasive and defensive. Eventually, he confessed to kidnapping April, but his story was inconsistent and disorganized. He insisted he did not intend harm to her, but struggled to explain his motives for snatching her in the first place. The prosecution built a compelling case demonstrating Bridger's premeditation. Surveillance footage confirmed he was driving through the town just before April vanished, having observed her outside her home and seized the opportunity. His actions were calculated, reflecting a disturbing presumption of control and disregard for her safety. In the days following the crime, Bridger showed no remorse. He had not only taken her life, but also gone to great lengths to erase any evidence linking him to the crime, destroying clothes and other items. Throughout the proceedings, the court painted a picture of a man without empathy, deliberately covering his tracks to avoid detection. The details of the murder revealed a disturbing degree of planning and cold-blooded intent, suggesting that his actions were motivated not by panic or fear, but by a malicious intent. The case left a lasting scar on the community and deepened the collective sorrow for a life cruelly taken. In April, Mark Bridger held April Jones at his residence for several hours before ultimately taking her life. The precise manner of her death remained unclear, but forensic analysis indicated she had been struck with a blunt instrument. An autopsy confirmed she succumbed to severe head injuries, and her remains were later discovered in an area close to Bridger's home. Throughout the case, his defense team attempted to argue that a mental disorder had impulsively driven his actions. They claimed that alcohol misuse and a history of mental health issues had clouded his judgment, leading to the crime. However, this argument was dismissed by both the prosecution and the jury, as overwhelming evidence showed Bridger's deliberate and calculated behavior. His preparations for the abduction, both before and after, revealed complete awareness of his actions, executed with chilling precision. The most intense moments of the trial surfaced when April's parents, Coral and Paul Jones, testified. They shared heartfelt memories of their daughter's lively personality and zest for life, expressing the heartbreak they endured upon realizing she had been taken from them. Their grief resonated deeply within the courtroom as they recounted her disappearance and its profound impact. For the parents, the trial was not only about seeking justice, but also about holding Bridger accountable, ensuring no other child would fall prey to such predatory behavior. Once a peaceful, close-knit town, Mineley was left shaken by the events surrounding April's disappearance and death. Many residents knew April personally, remembering her playing in the streets before her abduction. Her loss shattered the town's sense of safety, forcing the community to confront the harsh reality that someone they had once trusted could commit such a heinous act. In the aftermath, locals united to support the Jones family while grappling with feelings of betrayal and horror at the crime. Public reaction to Bridger's actions was one of disbelief and dread, with media outlets providing extensive coverage. Every new detail uncovered seemed to ripple through the nation, which was appalled by the brutality of the incident and Bridger's cold effort to conceal his involvement. The case ignited widespread debates about child protection and the necessity for stricter safeguards against predators targeting minors. As the trial approached its conclusion, the jury faced the critical task of determining Bridger's future. Given the compelling evidence against him, the national and global communities demanded justice for April. On the 30th of May in 2013, the court found Bridger guilty of her abduction, assault, and murder. The verdict resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of release, ensuring he would never again threaten another child. The conviction of Mark Bridger offered a sense of justice, but did little to ease the profound pain endured by April's family. No legal outcome could ever bring back their daughter or undo the trauma inflicted upon them. For Coral and Paul, the loss of their beloved girl became an enduring burden they would carry throughout their lives. Yet, in the aftermath, they found comfort in knowing that April's memory would continue to inspire change, striving to prevent other families from suffering similar heartbreak. Over the years, the tragic case of April Jones persisted as a stark reminder of the perils facing children in an increasingly uncertain world. Bridger's ruthless acts left a lasting imprint, and his eventual conviction served as a firm warning against those who might harm innocent youngsters. The impact of April's death extended beyond the courtroom, fueling the efforts of her family to champion stronger child protection laws and raise awareness of the dangers children confront daily. The aftermath of the trial profoundly affected both the local community and the wider United Kingdom. April's case ignited crucial discussions on child safety, exposing shortcomings in existing safeguards and prompting authorities, agencies, and communities to reassess their responses to potential threats. It highlighted the urgent need for more effective systems to identify and manage individuals with troubling histories who might pose risks to children. For the Jones family, the emotional toll was immense. Their grief for April's loss was everlasting, yet they chose to transform their anguish into purposeful action. Channeling their sorrow into advocacy, They diligently worked to bridge gaps within child protection services and promoted stricter legal protections. Their relentless efforts became a beacon of hope for others striving for justice and safety for their young loved ones. A key focus for the family was enhancing surveillance over individuals with known concerning behaviors, especially those who, like Bridger, had prior warning signs but had not faced serious criminal charges. Bridger's past included troubling conduct, allegations of misconduct, and a reputation for heavy drinking. Nonetheless, he was never formally marked as dangerous, which allowed him to avoid closer scrutiny. This failure to recognize the potential threat underscored the need for a more vigilant and comprehensive monitoring system for those seemingly at risk, especially when their interactions involved children. Through their determined campaigning, the family aimed to ensure that no warning signs go unnoticed, so that dangerous individuals are identified and kept away from vulnerable children. Their work continues to serve as a crucial reminder of the importance of vigilance and robust safeguards in protecting future generations. Beyond their efforts to protect children, the Jones family played a significant role in collaborating with lawmakers to reinforce legislation against child abduction and sexual offenses. They championed reforms aimed at improving the supervision of individuals convicted of severe crimes involving minors, especially those released back into the community. While Bridger received an indefinite sentence without the chance of parole, his case prompted critical questions about how to better monitor and prevent repeat offenses from individuals with dangerous histories. Their advocacy helped lead to the adoption of more rigorous oversight systems and legislation and focused on safeguarding children from potential threats. Over time, the memory of April Jones continued to influence national discussions around child protection. Her tragic story starkly illustrated the fragility of childhood and how swiftly safety can be compromised, even in seemingly secure neighborhoods. The brutality of her crime acted as a powerful catalyst, prompting lawmakers, law enforcement, and charitable organizations to rethink strategies aimed at protecting vulnerable children from predators hiding within their communities. The case also underscored the importance of early intervention for individuals showing concerning behaviors, with many experts arguing that earlier preventative measures might have averted the devastating outcome. April's story persisted in the media, not merely as a heartbreaking account of a life cut short, but as a symbol of the need for change. News outlets closely followed her legal proceedings, often highlighting broader issues related to child safety and community involvement. Public awareness initiatives were launched to educate parents and caregivers about the risks of abduction, and numerous child advocacy groups intensified efforts to promote stronger protective measures. Despite the passage of years, the grief surrounding April's passing remained deep. The small town of Mina, once known for its peaceful streets and close-knit community, was forever altered by the events of October 1st, 2012. Residents reflected on how her loss had transformed their perceptions and heightened their vigilance concerning their children's safety. The town's innocence seemed diminished, replaced by a collective understanding that even the safest places could be touched by terrible crimes. Yet this tragedy also showcased the resilience of the community, supporting one another through mourning, honoring April with memorials and tributes from across the United Kingdom. The shared sorrow united residents, demonstrating the strength of their bonds amid profound tragedy. Though the legal proceedings had concluded, the enduring memory of April's life and the community's response continued to inspire ongoing efforts towards safeguarding children everywhere. The justice system ultimately ensured that Mark Bridger would no longer pose a threat, confirming that he would never be free again. The tragedy of April Jones's case sparked lasting changes in child safety laws, leading to new preventative measures and heightened public awareness. For Coral and Paul Jones, however, the fight was intensely personal. Their unwavering dedication to protecting children became a central part of their lives, fueling their ongoing efforts to honor April's memory and prevent others from experiencing similar heartbreak. The story of April Jones is one marked by profound loss, yet also by remarkable strength, resilience, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Mark Bridger's conviction and subsequent sentencing marked only the beginning. Her family and community continue to carry her memory forward through their dedicated advocacy. They remain committed to ensuring that no child faces the suffering that took April from the world, and her legacy endures in the ongoing work and vigilance of those who refuse to forget her.